Chapter 1796. Many yin and yang elements were intertwined with each other, covering the leaves. Lu Ye's mind was immersed in it, meticulous. This was the most complex spirit pattern Lu Ye had come into contact with so far. Compared to it, it wasn't even worthy of carrying his shoes. He had to ensure that the construction process went smoothly without the slightest mistake, otherwise, all his previous efforts would be wasted. The magical characteristics of the talent tree itself gave him the possibility of completing this task. If he were to construct this spirit pattern on a jade board, Lu Ye estimated that he would have failed long ago. After a few days, when the last element was successfully constructed, the blood eye spirit pattern was truly completed. Looking inside, an obvious eye pattern appeared on the dense leaves of the talent tree. This pattern was pieced together by leaves and occupied a large area. Looking from a distance, it was as if the talent tree had grown an eye. The lines inside the eye crisscrossed, and if one looked carefully, they would find an inverted triangle pattern in the pupil, which looked extremely strange. Lu Ye was very curious about the use of this spirit pattern. When the demonic eye blinked, if a cultivator was in the outside world, their spirit sea would be eroded by this demonic eye and suspended in the air. This demonic eye had an illusory effect on cultivators, and under the influence of this demonic eye, a cultivator's state of mind would be greatly shaken and become easily irritable. In serious cases, they might even lose control of themselves. But if a cultivator was in the inner world, their strength would obviously increase when the blood moon hung in the sky. But according to Lu Ye's speculation, this was the work of the blood ancestors Saint Blood. In other words, whether it was the demonic eye imprinted in a cultivator's spirit sea or the blood moon suspended in this world, they were all manifestations of the blood ancestors Saint Blood in different environments. Even if he saw the blood eye spirit pattern, its power should not be comparable to the demonic eye spirit pattern. It might even have a completely different effect because he was not the blood ancestor. He had to find someone to test it out. Thinking of this, Lu Ye sent out a message and called the Xiang sisters. More than 10 days passed in a flash. On this day, Lu Ye was meditating when a note vibrated. He picked it up and found that it was a message from Hu Dequan. The time had come, the struggle of the Black Abyss was about to begin. Unknowingly, it had already been a year since he arrived in this world. According to the information he currently possessed, if he wanted to completely defeat the Saint Blood Mountain, he could only do so in the battlefield of the Black Abyss. If he failed this time, then he could only wait for another 10 years. 10 years might not be a long time for other Yu Yao, but it was a long time for Lu Ye. Therefore in this battle they could only win and not lose. He stood up, activated his divine sense, and walked out of the secret room he was in. Soon he arrived outside. Numerous figures appeared around him. They were none other than the dozen or so cultivators he had subdued earlier. Most of them were Yu Yao, and there were 2 or 3 star mansions mixed in with them. All of them had uneasy expressions on their faces. They didn't say much. After months of preparation, everyone had been waiting for this day to come. Set off. Lu Ye took the lead and walked to the side. Many cultivators followed closely behind. After a short while, a transmission array that had been set up ahead of time began to shine. This hidden stronghold began to disperse. A day later, in another hidden place, Lu Ye led his subordinates and waited quietly. After a short while, the sound of footsteps could be heard. Lu Ye, who had his eyes closed, turned his head and immediately saw several familiar faces. Not only that, but a few concealed auras also began to appear around him. Hu Dequan, Yang Ling, and Meng Su stood not far from Lu Ye and looked at each other. After a long while, Hu Dequan said with a serious expression, "Brother Lu, we can trust you, right?" Even though the Red Talisman Association had been in contact with the Red Talisman Association for several months now, they still found it hard to feel at ease now that things had come to this point. If Lu Ye's subordinates were arranged by Blazing Heaven, and they were so close to them, then they would definitely suffer a crushing defeat in this battle. Even though, from what they had seen, this possibility was not high. "You don't seem to have any other choice," Lu Ye said. Hu Dequan smiled bitterly. This was the most difficult part of the Red Talisman Association. Meng Su said, "Actually, I've always had a question. I wonder if you can answer it?" Lu Ye looked at him. "What is it?" "Ask away." Meng Su said, "Fellow Taoist, you're only at the Moon Jade intermediate stage, so how did you manage to recruit so many cultivators with higher cultivation bases? They seem to be extremely loyal to you." Meng Su had discovered this before, and he had also tried to ask Xiang Yin and the others about it. Unfortunately, he had never received an answer, so he was very confused. For cultivators, strength was always the most important thing. Lu Ye's subordinates were all at the Moon Jade late stage, and their cultivation bases were higher than his, so why did they have to listen to him? In the past he didn't ask Lu Yi directly. After all, this was his secret and it wasn't good to pry. However, with the imminent battle he had to get to the bottom of this. Even if they could trust Lu Yi, whether or not Lu Ye's subordinates could be trusted was another matter altogether. It would be bad if some of his subordinates betrayed him when the battle started. Lu Yi pondered for a moment before saying, "There are two types of blood tribe cultivators. The first type is ordinary blood tribe cultivators, and the second type is blood tribe cultivators who have obtained holy blood and possess holy nature. The latter can condense precious blood, which has countless uses. They can be bestowed upon other blood tribe cultivators and taken in as blood servants. The blood servants will naturally be loyal to their blood master." Meng Su frowned. "So Xiang Yin and the others are your blood servants? But fellow Taoist, you've only been in this world for a short time. In terms of holy nature, shouldn't they be more powerful than you?" "I already possessed holy nature before coming to this world. Xiang Yin and the others are inferior to me." Meng Su was confused. "Then are you a human or a blood tribe cultivator?" "I am a human, and the holy nature of the blood tribe is only one of my powers. It won't affect me in the slightest." Meng Su didn't say anything. It wasn't clear whether he believed Lu Yi, but he understood the doubts in his heart. Xiang Yin and the others were actually blood servants? Hu Dequan said, "All right, now that things have come to this, there's no turning back." He gazed deeply at Lu Yi. "Brother, I hope you won't disappoint us." "I won't." Hu Dequan turned his head and looked around. Then he shouted in a low voice, "Let's begin." As soon as he finished speaking, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association who were hiding in the surroundings walked out one by one. There weren't many of them, only about 30 of them. Including Lu Yi and the others, there were only about 40 of them. This was the team that the Red Talisman Association had painstakingly accumulated over the countless years. They were also the only people they could use. The cultivators of both sides gathered in one place. Hu Dequan raised his hand and a red light bloomed on his fingertip. A violent and ferocious aura spread out. Not only him but Yang Ling and Zhang Su also did the same. The three of them activated the power of the Red Talisman together, causing the void to tremble. Lu Yi quietly watched from the side. He had obtained a lot of information about the Battle of the Black Abyss from the Red Talisman Association. Of course, he knew that Hu Dequan and the others weren't really activating the Red Talisman. Instead, they were using the power of the Red Talisman as a guide. If Lu Yi wasn't wrong, the target of the guidance should be the consciousness of the inner world. As expected, as the power of the Red Talisman continued to spread out, a small black dot suddenly appeared in the middle of the three. When it first appeared, it was almost imperceptible. But in an instant, the small black dot expanded in all directions with a loud bang. None of them made any movements to dodge. In an instant, the vision of many cultivators darkened, and they felt as if their bodies were weightless. When they came back to their senses, they were no longer where they were originally. Lu Yi looked around and felt a strange sense of familiarity at a glance. Countless floating meteorites shuttled through the void, and floating continents of various sizes stretched across the void. This environment was surprisingly the same as the one he was in when he participated in the Battle of the Black Abyss on Mount Fangtsuan. The so-called Black Abyss was indeed no different from the space he entered back then. Lu Yi didn't know if it was the same Black Abyss. It was most likely not because the Battle of the Black Abyss happened once every 10 years. Although the cycle of the Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss was much longer, if it was really the same Black Abyss, there would definitely be a time when they interacted. If that was really the case, when a large group of unfamiliar Yu Yao suddenly appeared during the Battle of the Black Abyss, the situation would definitely be difficult to deal with. But after so many years, the three Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss Battle of the Black Abyss had never encountered such a situation. Lu Yi was more inclined to believe that this was another space, but it was more or less the same as the one he had been to before. The only difference was that there was a bright ray of light coming from not far away. Turning his head, he saw a small sun-like sphere emitting light. Upon closer inspection, he even saw a hazy blood-red color on the surface of the sphere. "Move, everyone move quickly," Hu Dequan shouted. He took the lead and rushed in the direction of the small sun. The others followed closely behind. Xiang Yin and the others gathered around Lu Yi. They looked at him, waiting for his instructions. "Follow the plan," Lu Yi instructed. Then he led his people and followed behind the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association. The so-called plan was nothing more than to assist the Red Talisman Association. After a short while, more than 40 people gathered around the small sun. Each of them stood solemnly. Hu Dequan looked in the direction of Lu Yi and the others and said solemnly, "Brother Lu, although I've talked with you through transmission before, I still have to tell you in detail. The so-called Battle of the Black Abyss is a battle to protect the origin. The origin was what the Red Talisman Association called the Small Sun. The origin was the origin of the inner world. Moreover, the origin did indeed have its own consciousness. Lu Yi had already confirmed this when he chatted with Hu Dequan before. Previously, the consciousness of the inner world would communicate with the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association and give them some guidance and help. But as time passed, this consciousness became quieter and quieter. Many times, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association couldn't get any response from it. The fundamental reason was the layer of blood red that covered the origin. Lu Yi could clearly sense an extremely terrifying divine nature from that layer of blood red. That blood red color was undoubtedly the power of the blood ancestors' precious blood. The precious blood was eroding the origin, and the origin had always been resisting it. Therefore it was always in a quiet state. Only during the Battle of the Black Abyss would the origin's consciousness be guided by the might of the Red Talisman Association and bring the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association here. Chapter 1797. In fact, the initial cycle of the Battle of the Black Abyss wasn't once every 10 years, but once every 100 years. However, as time passed, the cycle became shorter and shorter until it became once every 10 years in recent years. This was the hiding place of the origin consciousness, so the shortening of the cycle of the Battle of the Black Abyss undoubtedly meant that the origin consciousness was in a bad situation. And from the current situation, it seemed that the blood ancestors' treasured blood's corrosion of the origin consciousness was beginning to bear fruit. If this continued, even if the Red Talisman Association cultivators could bitterly hold on, the origin consciousness wouldn't be able to hold on. Once the origin consciousness was completely devoured by the treasured blood, there would be no place for the Red Talisman Association cultivators in this world. We're at a disadvantage against the Sacred Blood Peak because they outnumber us and have sunshine. But as the defending side, we also have an advantage because we arrived here in advance with the help of the origin consciousness, giving us enough time to make some preparations. Hu Dequan's voice continued to resound. This was also the biggest reason why the Red Talisman Association was able to hold on despite being at a disadvantage in terms of numbers and overall strength. Every time the Battle of the Black Abyss occurred, they would arrive here in advance and make some defensive arrangements. In the end, the origin consciousness was the origin consciousness of the core world, so it could naturally use its authority to make things easier for the cultivators on its side. Therefore, the current situation was that the Red Talisman Association cultivators arrived here first, and after some time the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators would be able to open a passage to this place. How long this delay would be depended on how long the origin consciousness could hold on because the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators were opening the passage to this place to break the origin consciousness's seal on this space. Therefore, we need to deploy some defensive measures as much as possible. Once the battle begins, our first task is to protect the origin consciousness and then kill the enemy. Once the battle begins, the origin consciousness will repel all enemies. As long as we can hold on long enough, the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators will be expelled from this place, and only then will we be able to win. Hu Dequan had previously discussed this matter with Lu Yi, and he had also mentioned that this kind of rejection would weaken with the passage of time. In the beginning, the origin consciousness would only need a day or even half a day to expel the enemy from this space, but during the last Battle of the Black Abyss, it took a full 5 days. This time it would definitely take longer. No matter what, the reason for this was that the quintessence's control over this space was weakening, and this was undoubtedly disadvantageous to the Red Talisman Association that was on the defensive here. After a simple explanation of the true essence of the struggle of Black Abyss, many cultivators quickly took action. They had to make more arrangements before the cultivators of St. Blood Peak arrived. One figure after another shuttled back and forth as a large number of asteroids and floating continents were transported back. Cultivators proficient in formations began to set up formations on these asteroids and floating continents. Lu Yi didn't immediately go to help. Instead, he flew towards the source of light. Back when Lu Yi was in the Magic Eye Spectacle, he had speculated that the inner world had its own consciousness. This was because the inner world had indeed shown a conscious reaction when it was rushing towards him. He had even tried to communicate with it, but unfortunately he did not receive any response. In the end, he was swallowed by the inner world. After entering this world, Lu Yi had also repeatedly tried to communicate with the world's consciousness, but to no avail. Only today did he realize that the consciousness of the inner world had been hiding in this special space all this time. Naturally, it would not respond to his calls. But if this was the case, then what was the situation when the inner world was rushing towards him? At that time, the inner world had clearly acted on its own and was searching for him. In particular, when he was preparing to escape and sacrificing his precious blood, the inner world's reaction was especially strong. As he pondered, a hair-raising thought suddenly popped up in Lu Ye's mind. What if the consciousness of the inner world wasn't the quintessence at that time? In other words, the inner world's action of swallowing him into the inner world wasn't the result of the quintessence's consciousness, but another consciousness? It had swallowed him in because it had sensed that he had the bloodline of the blood race. After swallowing him, he could be of help to it. If this was the case, then the truth was somewhat terrifying. The situation the Red Talisman Association was facing was much more serious than he had imagined. Lu Ye's expression changed as he raised his hand to touch the source of light in front of him. Not far away, Hu Duquan coldly observed. Just now he had seen Lu Ye flying towards the core source, but he didn't stop him. This was because he knew that any cultivator with a holy nature who approached the core source wouldn't have a good end. This had been confirmed in previous battles. Because of the layer of bloody light covering the core source, the holy nature seemed to be particularly strong. Any cultivator with a holy nature would find their strength suppressed the closer they got to the core source. But what shocked Hu Duquan was that Lu Ye didn't show any signs of being suppressed. When he touched the core source, Hu Duquan's eyes widened. What was going on? He couldn't understand because the scene in front of him had already surpassed his inherent understanding. What he could confirm was that Lu Ye had a holy nature and a very strong one at that. But it shouldn't be strong enough to not be suppressed by that layer of bloody light. But such a strange thing had happened. He found it strange because he didn't understand what Lu Ye had said before. Lu Ye had told him that he had a holy nature and could even use all kinds of vampire secret arts at will. However, the holy nature was only one of his powers. Of course, this power would be suppressed by the bloody light outside the core source. After all, this was the power of the blood ancestor's precious blood, and its holy nature was far beyond Lu Ye's reach. However, not only did Lu Ye possess a holiness, but he was also a weapon cultivator of the human race. Standing there, he was indeed unable to activate his own holiness, and it was difficult for him to use the blood kindred's secret arts. However, his powers were not affected at all. If it were Xiang Yin, she probably wouldn't even be able to get close to the core source. Hu Duquan saw that the situation wasn't right and was about to step forward to stop it, but in the next moment, his eyes widened. Because as Lu Ye's hand came into contact with the origin source, the hazy blood-red light covering the origin source began to undergo some strange changes. Originally, this blood-red light was like a shell that tightly wrapped around the origin source, but now it seemed to be boiling. At this moment, extremely tiny roots that could not be seen extended from Lu Ye's palm. In the blink of an eye, they wrapped around the enormous origin. Lu Ye had activated the power of the talent tree. If the core source was a cultivator, then the hazy bloody light was a foreign object that invaded the cultivator's body. It was like the curse power in the mermaid clan's bloodline, or the soul-devouring aphids in Yaya's divine sea. Lu Ye activated the power of the talent tree to try and see if he could burn away this layer of bloody light. In just a moment of contact, Lu Ye knew that it could be done. Because with the activation of the talent tree's power, the layer of bloody light was obviously showing some abnormal reactions. The bloody light turned into a bloody mist and seemed to be evaporating, and the color of the bloody light was slowly weakening. Hu Duquan finally came to and rushed in front of Lu Ye. He was surprised and doubtful. "Brother Lu, what are you doing?" He wanted to stop him because no matter what Lu Ye was doing, the core source couldn't be touched casually. If Lu Ye had evil intentions, then this battle would be lost without a fight. But after seeing the changes in the core with his own eyes, he realized that what Lu Ye was doing seemed to be a good thing for the core source. "I'll tell you later," Lu Ye replied and focused on activating the power of the talent tree. At this moment, he clearly felt that in the process of burning away the bloody light, some mysterious things were refined into his body through the roots of the talent tree. He felt that his own holiness was rapidly increasing. Originally, after coming to this world, he had bestowed a lot of precious blood, which had actually damaged his own holiness. But because his holiness was too strong, this damage was not very obvious. Compared to other blood kindred, he still had enough of an advantage to crush them with his holiness. If he wanted to replenish the lost holiness, then he could only refine more blood kindred's holy blood. He definitely couldn't find any blood kindred's holy blood for the time being, but he didn't want to wait for a huge replenishment here. While thinking, Lu Ye realized that this bloody light was the manifestation of the blood ancestor's holy blood. His original intention was to burn it away so that it could reduce the pressure on the core's consciousness. Maybe it would be of some help to his side in the upcoming battle. But this burning process was equivalent to using the bloody light as a cultivation resource like spirit jade. In the process of refining the spirit jade, Lu Yi used the roots of the talent tree to probe into the spirit jade. While burning away the impurities, he also refined the energy of the spirit jade for his own use and strengthened his foundation. The current situation was that he had exchanged the spirit jade for this layer of bloody light. In essence, his current state was no different from normal cultivation. It was just that in this kind of cultivation, his cultivation would not increase, but his blood kindred's holiness would rapidly increase. Great nourishment. The holiness he had lost before was quickly replenished, and it was still increasing. Hu Duquan stood to the side and watched, becoming more and more certain that Lu Ye's actions were beneficial to the core. He no longer had any thoughts of stopping him and let him stay here while he began to preside over the various matters of constructing the defensive line. Lu Yi originally thought that he could quickly refine the layer of bloody light, but no matter how he refined it, the layer of bloody light showed no signs of weakening. But the growth of his holiness in his body was obvious. This allowed him to slowly understand one thing. The blood ancestor's holy blood was not just on the surface of the core, but also on the inside. This gave him the illusion that he could not completely refine it. If he had enough time, he should be able to return the core to its origin, but there was definitely not enough time, making it somewhat difficult for him to do so. Just as he was feeling helpless, he suddenly felt a force gently touching his divine sea's defenses, as if someone was knocking on his door. Lu Yi was stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted and opened his divine sea, anxiously immersing himself in his soul avatar. Within the divine sea, Lu Yi looked up and saw that there was an additional figure here at a glance. A white-haired old man with a walking stick in his hand. He was very short, about the height of a 10-year-old child. His long beard hung down to his chest, and his forehead was bulging like a mountain. End of chapter. Chapter 1798. Looking at the figure of the little old man who had suddenly appeared in his divine sea, and thinking back to when his divine sea had been lightly touched, Lu Yi immediately realized the other party's identity, a source consciousness? If he was not mistaken, this little old man in front of him was an existence similar to Xiao Jiao and Huanyang, a manifestation of a world domain's will. His divine sea's defenses being touched was undoubtedly the work of this old man. The little old man nodded lightly, yes. He then asked, the Dao Tree bloodline? What? Lu Yi frowned, not understanding. The little old man gave Lu Yi a deep look and did not explain much, but Lu Yi clearly saw a look of dread in the other party's eyes, and he did not know if it was just his imagination. Just as he was about to ask something, the little old man seemed to have discovered a new world and stared at the 7-colored divine lotus at the foot of Lu Ye's soul avatar in surprise. Soul-warming lotus? Taking a closer look, he shook his head. No, it's just a soul avatar. Boy, what is your relationship with the soul race? I can barely be considered a half-clansman of the soul race, Lu Yi replied casually. The little old man's eyes twitched obviously. What was this? What did he mean by barely be considered a half-clansman of the soul race? If he was, then he was. If he wasn't, then he wasn't. But seeing that there was such a divine lotus in the other party's divine sea, he knew that his relationship with the soul race was not ordinary. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to have such a treasure guarding his divine sea. Just as he was contemplating though, Lu Yi said, Old Fong, the Battle of Black Abyss has begun, and it won't be long before the people from St. Blood Peak arrive. I want to use this battle to kill them all. What kind of help can Old Fong provide? The little old man was stunned for a moment before realizing that Old Fong had called him Old Fong, because of the name Minuscule Mountain. No one had ever called him this before, so he was surprised for a moment, but he didn't care much about it. Hearing this, he slowly shook his head. My essence has been contaminated by the blood ancestor's precious blood. For many years, this old master has been fighting against it. If it weren't for your help today, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to come here to see you. Once the battle begins, all this old master can do is expel the invading enemy with all his strength. Lu Yi understood and was a little disappointed, but after thinking about it, he couldn't ask for too much. Fang Lao's origin had been contaminated by a portion of the blood ancestor's precious blood's power for so many years, and with his help today, Fang Lao's origin consciousness was able to relax for a moment. However, he definitely couldn't continue to relax like this. Elder Fang had sensed that Lu Yi was different from the others, so he had purposely shown himself to meet him. Therefore, in the Battle of the Black Abyss he still had to rely on himself. Brat, don't think you can eat until you're fat. Win this battle first and then help me resolve the danger of the source core. Only then can we plan for the future. Elder Fong's voice rang out. The danger of the source core had only been slightly weakened, but it hadn't been completely resolved. This wasn't something that could be accomplished in a single day. The source core that had been contaminated by a portion of the blood ancestors' precious blood's power was like suffering from an illness. As the saying goes, illness comes like a landslide, but it goes away like silk. From Elder Fong's point of view, it was unrealistic for Lu Yi to want to exterminate Saint Blood Mountain in a single battle. This kind of thing could only be done slowly. Lu Yi frowned. He didn't want to plan for the future. Right now he just wanted to settle everything with a single battle. After thinking for a moment, Lu Yi asked, Elder Fong, that blood ancestor's precious blood, does it have its own consciousness? The reason for this guess was naturally because of all the thoughts that had flashed through his mind before. If the consciousness that had swallowed him into this world wasn't Heart Mountain's consciousness, then there was only one other possibility. Elder Fong nodded and said, that's right, but don't worry too much. That consciousness isn't complete. It should have been born from the remnant will of the blood ancestor's precious blood. That's why its intelligence is a bit hazy, like a child that hasn't been born for long. Moreover, this is the source core space, so it can't enter. Only cultivators like you can enter. After obtaining a definite answer from Elder Fong, even though Lu Yi already had his suspicions, he was still shocked. He couldn't help but recall some information he had obtained when he first came into contact with the blood race's inheritance. It was rumored that the blood race's bloodline could be reborn from a single drop of blood. He had always felt that this kind of thing was too illusory, but now it seemed that he was just a frog at the bottom of a well. The blood ancestor had been dead for who knew how many years, and her remaining body had been split into many pieces. However, the drop of precious blood she had left behind had actually given birth to a consciousness. A single drop of the blood ancestor's precious blood had caused Heart Mountain's core consciousness to be in such a sorry state. Just how powerful had the blood ancestor been back then? And what kind of existence had been able to split the blood ancestor's body into pieces? Lu Yi couldn't think too deeply about this. Right now, because this consciousness was born from the remnant will of the blood ancestor, it must have inherited many things from the blood ancestor. Could this be considered a kind of rebirth? Elder Fong had said that the blood ancestor's drop of precious blood couldn't enter this place. As for the reason, Lu Yi didn't know, but since Elder Fong had said so, then it must be true. In other words, that drop of precious blood had always been outside. Lu Yi immediately thought of the blood moon hanging in the sky. He had always been curious about the essence of the blood moon and had once guessed it. Now that he heard Elder Fong's words, he was almost certain that the blood moon was formed from the blood ancestor's precious blood. However, Lu Yi quickly thought of another matter. Elder Fong, if the blood ancestor's precious blood couldn't enter, then how was the origin contaminated? Naturally, it was contaminated by the divine nature of the cultivators who died here. To put it bluntly, the divine nature is an extension of the blood ancestor's precious blood's power. The precious blood's ignorant will has always been its main goal to invade the origin, so all of the divine nature's power will automatically contaminate the origin. Lu Yi came to a realization. After generations of fighting in the Black Abyss, there must have been many cultivators from the Saint Blood Mountain who had died in battle. After that, the divine nature in their bodies dissipated and slowly contaminated the origin. So kid, do your best to win this battle. After that, this old man will work with you to find a way to deal with that drop of precious blood. If anyone else had come here, Elder Fong definitely wouldn't have appeared because it was meaningless. However, Lu Yi was different. The inheritance of the Dao Tree bloodline gave Elder Fong hope because to the Dao Tree bloodline, there was nothing in the world that it couldn't refine, including the blood ancestor's precious blood. Lu Yi nodded. I'll do my best. Within the divine sea, Elder Fong's figure dissipated. Lu Yi opened his eyes and pressed his hand on the origin, activating the talent tree's power and continuing to refine the power of the precious blood inside the origin. The more he refined, the lighter the pressure on the origin's consciousness would be. Everyone else was busy. Wu Duquan was overseeing everything and constantly issuing orders. There was a large space around the origin that was filled with layers of formations and killing intent. A few days later, the space suddenly began to tremble. Only then did Wu Duquan flash to Lu Ye's side. Brother, the people from the Saint Blood Mountain are coming. According to the plan, we have to hide the origin. Although this kind of concealment couldn't be maintained for too long and would be found by the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain sooner or later, as the defending side, stalling for time was undoubtedly a strategy. Lu Yi understood and retreated. Hu Dequan called out, and immediately several cultivators rushed over from the left and right, setting up a concealment formation near the origin. The space continued to vibrate for half a day before it finally stopped. Lu Yi, who was hiding on a meteorite and using the formation to conceal his aura, instantly sensed a powerful divine sense sweeping over from a certain direction. It was Rizhao's divine sense. If nothing went wrong, it must be Blazing Heaven himself. The cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain must have come out in full force. They were like this every time, but every time they returned in defeat. This battle had lasted for countless years since ancient times. Amidst the silence of the void, murderous intent was hidden. Soon, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain scattered into small groups under Blazing Heaven's orders. The first thing they had to do was to find the exact location of the origin. Only then could they target it. In the process of searching, both sides were also competing. The main purpose of the Red Talisman Association was to stall for time, but under the premise that the general direction remained unchanged, it was also necessary to kill as many enemies as possible. In an instant, a sea of blood appeared in the origin space. Searching in all directions, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain hid in the sea of blood. On the meteorite, where Lu Yi was hiding, Hu Dequan was beside him with a nervous expression. "Brother, how confident are you?" In the past, at this stage, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association usually chose to hide as much as possible because their overall strength was inferior to others, and there was no advantage in taking the initiative to attack. Moreover, the cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain worked together to activate the Blood Sea technique, which could be used to attack and defend against enemies. It was really not easy to deal with. Unless the enemy happened to enter the range of the spirit array they had set up, they would use the power of the spirit array to launch an attack. However, the origin space was not small. Even if they entered a few days in advance, the number of spirit arrays they could set up was limited. It was completely dependent on luck to let the enemy enter the range of the spirit array. However, things were different this time. After a discussion with Hu Dequan, Lu Yi changed her previous strategy and chose a more radical approach. "Just wait," Lu Yi replied. In his perception, the position of all the blood warriors in the entire origin space was clear at a glance. This was a perception that came from his bloodline and not his divine sense, so the range of his perception was extremely wide. Hu Dequan was a little nervous. Although he had been persuaded by Lu Yi before, when it came to this step, he could not help but feel nervous. The Red Talisman Association did not have many people, so they could not bear too much trouble. In another space, the 6 members of the Red Talisman Association, Xiang Yin, and 2 other blood warriors accepted by Lu Yi were rushing in a direction without any concealment. Xiang Yin took the lead, holding their own spirit runes and constantly communicating with Lu Yi to determine the direction. Not long after, Xiang Yin shouted, "Prepare to meet the enemy." The others in the group raised their heads and saw a sea of blood rapidly moving in front of them, carefully searching every space in an attempt to find the location of the origin space. End of this chapter. Chapter 1799. Xiang Yin and the others didn't conceal their auras, so when they discovered the enemy also sensed their presence. This caused the Sacred Blood Mountain team to immediately rush over as if they had been injected with chicken blood. This was their usual thinking. In the past battles of the Black Abyss, whenever the Red Talisman Association cultivators encountered the Sacred Blood Mountain team under such circumstances, there was a high chance that they would flee. Even if they didn't flee, they would focus on restraining them. But what surprised the Sacred Blood Mountain team was that the enemies they encountered this time reacted rather strangely. They didn't flee, nor did they intend to scatter in all directions to restrain them. Instead, they charged straight at them. The distance between them rapidly closed, and both sides seemed to want to take down the other in one go. Although the leading Sacred Blood Mountain cultivator found it strange, it was already too late to change their formation at this point. The moment the two teams collided, the vast sea of blood suddenly became restless. Within the sea of blood, the expressions of the Sacred Blood Mountain cultivators changed drastically. The leader even turned around and stared in a certain direction as he roared, "Zhao Bingli, how dare you betray us?" The sea of blood's turbulence wasn't caused by the enemy, but by their own side. This was something that the Sacred Blood Mountain cultivators could clearly feel. This secret technique where multiple cultivators used blood arts together and then fused together to form a sea of blood was the most common method used by the blood race against their enemies. This was because after the sea of blood fused together, it would become larger and more powerful. It could even be said that even Constellation Realm cultivators would be able to display their usefulness in such a situation and provide some assistance to the stronger cultivators on their side. However, there was still a problem that needed to be resolved when using blood arts like this, and that was the suppression of their holiness. If everyone didn't possess holiness, then it would naturally be easy as no one would be able to suppress the other. If only one of the blood race members in the team possessed holiness, then it would be simple. That person would be able to preside over the sea of blood, and the other blood race members would assist him. But for the sacred blood mountain cultivators, everyone possessed holiness, so only the one with the strongest holiness could preside over the sea of blood, while the other cultivators restrained their holiness and assisted him. The sacred restraining technique was a secret technique of the blood race that was specially used in such situations. By activating this technique, the blood race members could restrain their holiness and prevent the situation of everyone suppressing and interfering with each other. But at the moment when the Saint Blood Mountain team was about to clash with the enemy, Zhao Bingli, who was in the team, suddenly did not restrain his holiness. What made the other cultivators even more shocked and puzzled was that Zhao Bingli's holiness was actually stronger than all of them. This was simply unimaginable. The strength of a Saint Blood Mountain cultivator's holiness was basically related to how long they had been in this realm. The longer they had been in this realm, the stronger their holiness would be. This was because they could bathe in more blood rain and refine more of the resources produced by this realm. Although Zhao Bingli's time in this world was not the shortest, it was not the longest either. There were many people with stronger holiness than him. Therefore, no one knew why his holiness had suddenly skyrocketed to such an extent. The only thing he was certain of was that Zhao Bingli's actions were undoubtedly a betrayal of Saint Blood Peak. When the balance of the Blood Sea was broken, the Red Talisman Association's team charged over under the lead of Xiang Yin and her sister. In the next instant, a holiness even stronger than Zhao Bingli's spread out. The already turbulent Blood Sea became even more fragile and collapsed with a loud bang. The cultivators of Saint Blood Peak that were hiding within the Sea of Blood revealed themselves in a sorry state, and all of them had unsightly expressions. Moreover, the thing that caused them to feel even more terrified was that the members of the Red Talisman Association had already arrived, and it just so happened that their magic energy was in a suppressed state. After an incense stick's worth of time, Hu Dequan's eyes suddenly widened. His face was filled with disbelief. He turned to look at Lu Yi, his lips trembling. Annihilated. Brother, Xiang Yin's team has annihilated a Saint Blood Mountain team. He had undoubtedly received a message from the other side. Got it? Lu Yi nodded. He had also received the message from Xiang Yin. Lu Yi was not surprised by this result. In the years since he entered this realm, he had been refining his own precious blood. But so far he did not have a single drop left in his body. He had used all of it to subdue blood servants. In addition to Xiang Yin and Yu Yao who had been following him all this time, there were also several blood servants hidden in Saint Blood Mountain. Today's battle was the time to use these hidden blood servants. Each blood servant had refined a drop of his precious blood, and Xiang Yin and her sister had refined 1.5 drops. In terms of pure holiness, there were very few in Saint Blood Mountain who could compare to them. Hiding in the dark, the blood servants suddenly turned against him at a critical moment. Coupled with the suppression of their bloodline, it was not surprising that they could achieve such a result. Hu Dequan was extremely excited because the Red Talisman Association had never fought such a satisfying battle in the Battle of Blackwater in the past. Even if they were able to occupy an advantage in small-scale battles, it was absolutely impossible for them to annihilate all their enemies. Such a good start was enough to raise everyone's spirits. He secretly rejoiced. Fortunately, he had reached a consensus with Lu Yi before the battle and chose to believe in him. Otherwise, how could such a good thing happen? Without Lu Ye's help, the Red Talisman Association would likely continue on its old path. After pondering for a moment, Hu Dequan said, "Brother, I'll leave this battle to you. We'll fight however you want." At this moment he no longer doubted Lu Ye's determination to fight against Saint Blood Mountain and decided to hand over his command to Lu Yi. After all, having two voices in one team wasn't good. After saying that, he stood up and stretched his body, looking like he was about to go all out. He flashed out of his hiding place and said, "I'm going to kill the enemy too." Atop the meteorite, Lu Yi watched him leave without stopping him, continuing to sense the positions of the blood servants and sending out a series of messages. The blood warriors in the two camps moved closer to each other. In another direction, another team from Saint Blood Mountain encountered the same misfortune as the previous team, but this time the ones leading the attack were not Xiang Yin and her sister, but Wang Taixing and Zhou Ran. Although Wang Taixing and Zhou Ran's holiness was slightly worse than Xiang Yin and her sisters, under the premise that they were unprepared for this battle, it wasn't difficult for them to win. Time passed by, and under Lu Ye's overall command, the scattered teams from St. Blood Mountain suffered one disaster after another. Once this happened, none of them could escape the fate of being wiped out. Such news spread among the Red Talisman Association cultivators, causing many of them who were accustomed to hard times to feel both incredulous and excited. In the past, they had always been the passive party, never having expected that one day they would be able to take the initiative to attack, and every time they would easily achieve great results. The gap in numbers between the two sides was constantly shrinking, and the contrast in overall strength was no longer so great. For a moment, all the cultivators on their side couldn't help feeling that they had the upper hand. Only Lu Yi, who was responsible for overseeing the rear, felt a trace of unease in his heart because although the battle was progressing smoothly in reality, the enemy's strongest master had yet to appear. Blazing Heaven must have already arrived in this space. Lu Yi could feel his radiant aura from afar, but what puzzled him was that Blazing Heaven had not moved from his original position since he arrived. No matter how many of his subordinates were injured, Blazing Heaven remained indifferent to them. According to the information provided by the blood servants hidden in St. Blood Mountain, Blazing Heaven didn't even give any direct instructions to the cultivators under his command. He was like a spectator watching this farce from afar. No matter who won or lost, it didn't affect him in the slightest. There must be a reason for this abnormality. If they wanted to win this battle, Blazing Heaven was the key. Only by killing him could they be considered a true victory. If Blazing Heaven didn't die, even if all the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain died, they still wouldn't be able to win. While he was deep in thought, a ferocious aura suddenly erupted from a certain direction. Lu Ye's expression turned cold as he turned his head to look in that direction. Even from an unknown distance, he could still see a red light blooming in that direction. In his bloodline perception, he could sense that two of his blood servants had disappeared without a trace in that direction. The power of the Red Talisman. According to the information he obtained from Hu Dequan, after so many years, several cultivators with Red Talismans couldn't hold on to the ideals in their hearts and betrayed the Red Talisman Association, turning to side with St. Blood Mountain. But after one battle after another, only one of these people was still alive. Originally there were two, however the other one was killed by Lu Yi at Snow Listening Peak. The Red Talisman was undoubtedly a great killing weapon for any side, so it wouldn't be used lightly. But now, the Red Talisman's might was being activated, so it was obvious that the cultivator with the Red Talisman had been forced into a desperate situation. The two blood warriors under his command had been killed by Yang Kai. Soon news came from the battlefield. Not only were his two blood servants killed by the Red Talisman Association, but also 3 members of the Red Talisman Association, all of whom were in the Yu Yao realm. Since the beginning of the battle, this was the first time they had suffered losses. They had lost 5 people in one go, which was a huge loss. However, the enemy didn't have it easy either. The enemy team had been completely wiped out, so it could be considered as revenge. Lu Yi pondered for a moment, then sent a message out, "Brother, we can move out now. Be careful." In another direction, Yang Ling, who had been hibernating and conserving his strength, suddenly opened his eyes. He checked the sound talisman's message, but didn't respond. He stood up and rushed forward. That direction was where Blazing Heaven was. In the past, every time in the Battle of the Black Abyss, it was Yang Ling who restrained Blazing Heaven, because he was the only one with 2 red talismans on the Red Talisman Association's side, one for attack and one for defense. After many years of nourishment, any red talisman was no weaker than Sunshine, so even if his cultivation was much lower, it was no problem for him to restrain Blazing Heaven. Yang Ling was already familiar with this. This time was no exception. Lu Yi was very concerned about Blazing Heaven, and wanted to know what he was doing at the moment, but he couldn't investigate it himself, because once he met Blazing Heaven, it was very likely that he would be forced to reveal the strength of his divine attribute. Before he really fought with Blazing Heaven, Lu Yi didn't want to expose this point, so he could only trouble Yang Ling to make a trip. End of chapter. Chapter 1800. In the void, Yang Ling's figure moved with a solemn expression. As he approached Blazing Heaven's position, his body began to emit a faint red light, as if a layer of blood mist had enveloped him. The red light became brighter and brighter, and its power became more and more intense. Blazing Heaven, who had been standing quietly in place, finally sensed something. He turned his head to look in Yang Ling's direction, and a disdainful sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Finally, Yang Ling stood 300 kilometers away from blazing heaven, his body glowing with red light. The power of the red talisman had been pushed to the extreme, and it could be activated at any time. The powerful aura caused Yang Ling's clothes to flutter and his hair to fly. He stared at blazing heaven with a solemn and focused expression. If blazing heaven made any inappropriate moves, the power of the red talisman would be activated immediately. Their eyes met, and blazing heaven raised his hand slightly, pointing it at Yang Ling, then crooked his finger and said in a mocking voice, "Do you dare?" Yang Ling didn't respond. Even though besides him, Hu Dequan and Meng Su both possessed a red talisman each, but these were the few red talismans left in their red talisman association. Every single one of them used would be one less, so he really didn't dare take the initiative to make a move. The power of the red talisman was terrifying, but he wasn't sure if it could kill a Rizhao. However, once he activated the red talisman, if blazing heaven didn't die, he would die without a doubt. He didn't dare to take the risk, so even if blazing heaven ridiculed and provoked him, he just ignored it and did his job well. Seeing Yang Ling not moving, blazing heaven snorted softly and ignored him. He spread out his divine sense and could clearly sense that the cultivators under his command were dying, but he still didn't do anything, and only had an unfathomable expression on his face. In the end, Lu Yi still took action. The blood servants he had planted in St. Blood Mountain were exposed one after another, and the St. Blood Mountain team also realized that something was wrong, so they became more cautious. Of course, this wasn't the main reason he was forced to take action. The main reason was that there were a few cultivators on St. Blood Mountain's side, and their divine nature was so strong that even Xiang Yin and her sister couldn't compare. These cultivators were the ones who'd been in this world for the longest time. They'd bathed in blood rain for an entire few thousands of years and refined various resources, allowing them to accumulate a sufficiently impressive amount of dense saint aura within their bodies. With such a cultivator leading them, the Sacred Blood Mountain no longer had to endure the suppression of the Sacred Blood Mountain. As a result, the Red Talisman Association's team was unable to quickly exterminate their enemies like they had in the beginning. Once the war broke out, it would be incomparably intense. There were casualties on the enemy's side, but there were also casualties on their side. Fortunately, the strength of the Saint Blood Mountain had been constantly weakened. Otherwise, the current situation would be very disadvantageous for the Red Talisman Association. Somewhere on the battlefield, the battle was extremely intense. The figures of the Red Talisman Association's cultivators flashed as they continuously evaded the Sea of Blood. At the same time, they executed various techniques. The cultivators of the Saint Blood Mountain were hidden in the Sea of Blood. With the Sea of Blood as their base, they had the absolute upper hand. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin were in a sorry state, and they didn't dare get too close to the Sea of Blood at all. Because the Saint Blood Mountain's cultivator that controlled the Sea of Blood was stronger than them in terms of Saint Aura. Once they were swallowed by the Sea of Blood, then they would definitely perish. Suddenly, a flowing light flashed over swiftly from a certain direction. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin were shocked when they sensed this familiar aura. The Exalt Master has arrived. They'd been stalling for time all along because they were waiting for this moment. They'd personally experienced how terrifying Lu Ye's Saint Aura was, so they naturally knew what would happen next. They immediately sent out their divine perception to the cultivators on their side and told them to prepare to counterattack. After that, they saw Lu Yi didn't stop and charge headfirst into the Sea of Blood. In the next instant, exclaims of shock resounded. Even if they were very far away, their bodies still went weak when the terrifying Saint Aura erupted. The entire Sea of Blood rumbled as it collapsed, revealing the figures of almost 10 cultivators that were hidden within it. All of them were at a loss for what to do and had terrified expressions. When they saw this, how could the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association who'd received the instructions via voice transmission from Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin wouldn't hesitate, and they seized this opportunity to pounce forward. Lu Ye's dense Saint Aura continued to surge as he held his saber horizontally in front of him. Saber light flickered as he unleashed a massacre. After the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association pounced over, the originally anxious battle immediately turned into a one-sided slaughter. After a short while, the battlefield quieted down. Lu Yi turned his head to look at Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin who were standing in the distance. He discovered that although they were injured, they weren't seriously injured. They were just in a sorry state. Without stopping, Lu Ye's figure flashed and pounced in another direction. In that direction, a similarly anxious battle was erupting, and it was abnormally fierce. As time passed, the teams of Saint Blood Mountain were eliminated one after another. The overall strength of both sides went from being crushed to gradually reaching a balance, and then the tables turned. In just a short 2 days, almost all the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain had been slaughtered. On a meteorite, Hu Dequan, who was covered in blood, returned and landed beside Lu Yi. Although he looked a little tired, his spirit was extremely high. "Brother, you've really made a good plan." There had never been a battle in the Black Abyss where the Red Talisman Association had such a satisfying victory. Although they had suffered some losses, and the losses weren't small, after this battle, the wings of blazing heaven on St. Blood Mountain's side were almost completely cut off. In just 2 short days, Hu Dequan had witnessed Lu Ye's terrifying ability to dispatch and kill the enemy. Any order he gave would cause a team of St. Blood Mountain to suffer. If it weren't for Lu Yi, this battle wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Lu Yi turned his head and glanced at him. "Blazing heaven is still alive." Hu Dequan nodded solemnly. "So we still have to deal with him. Only by dealing with him could this battle be considered a true victory, and in the future St. Blood Mountain would no longer exist in this region." While speaking, Hu Dequan frowned again. "But brother, I feel that something is not quite right." Lu Ye's eyes flashed. "What's wrong?" "Blazing heaven hasn't made any moves. I went to take a look from afar." Although Yang Ling used the power of the Red Talisman to restrain him, logically speaking, with St. Blood Mountain's heavy losses, Blazing Heaven shouldn't have done nothing. But since he entered here, he hasn't moved. "I'm afraid he's up to something." Lu Yi nodded. "He's definitely up to something. Right now no one knows what he's planning, but there's one thing, his subordinates are almost all dead. No matter what he's planning, he has no one he can use. Rizhao is terrifying, but he's alone. We still have more than 30 people, so if we work together we should be able to take him down." Hu Dequan thought about it seriously for a moment, then agreed. "You're right." At this moment, Lu Ye's sound talisman trembled slightly. He checked it and said, "The last team of St. Blood Mountain has been destroyed. It's time to deal with Blazing Heaven." Hu Dequan's expression turned solemn. "Let's go, I've nurtured that red talisman for many years. It's time for it to see the light of day." The two of them flew forward together. Lu Ye's gaze was deep as he looked forward, the uneasiness in his heart growing stronger. He had no way of guessing what Blazing Heaven was planning. Although he had secretly subdued some St. Blood Mountain cultivators and inadvertently discovered another secret, he knew nothing about Blazing Heaven. In this battle, even if Blazing Heaven was tied down by Yang Ling and couldn't personally take action, why didn't the St. Blood Mountain teams gather together after sensing that the situation was not right? Why did they continue to wander around in small groups? Logically speaking, if they gathered together, their ability to protect themselves would be much greater. However, they didn't do so. Their scattering undoubtedly gave the other side an opportunity to take them down one by one. In addition, Lu Yi didn't believe that Blazing Heaven didn't take action purely because he was tied down by Yang Ling. If he were in Blazing Heaven's position with so many of his subordinates dead, he would have to give it his all. As long as he could withstand Yang Ling's red talisman, then he could take the lives of anyone on this battlefield. As Lu Yi and Hu Dequan flew towards Blazing Heaven's position, the other cultivators on their side also received orders to gather together. The faces of all the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were filled with excitement because they'd never experienced such a satisfying battle. In the past, every single time they went against the St. Blood Mountain, they'd always been at an absolute disadvantage, and they'd always been forced to hide. However, this time, so many cultivators of St. Blood Mountain had been killed by them. They hadn't even used many of the formations they had set up before, and the location of the origin source had never been exposed. Now, Blazing Heaven was the only one left in St. Blood Mountain. Although there was no sunlight on their side, they had several red talismans and many cultivators who were still alive. Even if they used their lives, they could take down Blazing Heaven. They would definitely win this battle. In the void, Blazing Heaven was still standing there quietly. 300 kilometers away, Yang Ling was secretly activating the might of the Red Talisman as a deterrent. Even though he already knew that almost all the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain had been killed, he didn't dare to relax in the slightest. His eyes were fixed on Blazing Heaven. If Blazing Heaven made any inappropriate movements, the Red Talisman's might would be activated immediately. Suddenly, Blazing Heaven looked at Yang Ling with a puzzled expression. "How did you do it?" Yang Ling became even more vigilant. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "What?" Blazing Heaven said slowly, "On the surface, my St. Blood Mountain is several times stronger than your Red Talisman Association. How did you kill all the cultivators under my command? Also, what methods did you use to instigate those traitors?" He stood there and spread out his divine sense. Although he could sense the withering of life, he couldn't investigate the specific situation of the battle, so he was really curious. He could sense that there were cultivators under his command who had betrayed him, and there was more than one of them. However, those traitors shouldn't have affected the overall trend of the battle. "Do you think I'll answer you?" Yang Ling replied coldly. Blazing Heaven sighed. "Forget it. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. It doesn't matter." His dispirited appearance made Yang Ling frown. He instinctively felt that something was wrong, but he didn't dare to think too deeply about it, lest he become absent-minded. End of chapter. Chapter 1801. All of a sudden Yang Ling detected a familiar aura quickly approaching him, and he became spirited. A moment later 2 figures stood not far from him. They were Lu Yi and Hu Dequan, who had rushed over at the first moment. Soon another team led by Meng Su arrived and assembled. After a while, the scattered Red Talisman Association cultivators gathered. Compared to before the battle, there were a dozen fewer people, and most of them were Red Talisman Association cultivators. Lu Ye's blood servants had also lost a few. Moreover, after 2 days of battle, almost everyone was not in peak condition. Some of them had not even recovered from their injuries. Even so, there were still nearly 30 people left. Looking at Blazing Heaven, Hu Dequan's face was filled with resentment. He couldn't help but think back to all the years he had spent fighting against the Saint Blood Peak. He roared, "Blazing Heaven, your time of death has come." He thought that Blazing Heaven would still be stubborn despite the situation. After all, he was facing Rizhao. Unexpectedly, he nodded and said, "Yes, you are really impressive." As he spoke, his gaze swept across the front, pausing slightly on Lu Yi. He revealed a puzzled expression because he had never seen Lu Yi before. However, he didn't seem to care too much and quickly moved away. Blazing Heaven's calmness made Hu Dequan frown. Recalling what Lu Yi had said to him, he couldn't help but shout, "What are you planning?" Blazing Heaven laughed, "My subordinates have all been killed by you, and I'm restrained here by your red talisman. What can I do? I'm just standing here waiting for death." Hu Dequan said angrily, "If you really want to die, why don't you commit suicide? Otherwise you'll die a horrible death." Blazing Heaven raised his eyebrows. "Why not?" Hu Dequan opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. Of course, he wasn't naive enough to believe that Rizhao would commit suicide. Meng Su said coldly, "There's no need to talk nonsense with him. Just kill him. As long as he's dead, no matter what scheme he has, it'll be useless." As he spoke, he raised his hand and a dazzling red light bloomed at his fingertips. Hearing this, Hu Dequan nodded, "Do it." He also activated the power of his red talisman. Lu Ye's eyes flashed and he also activated the power of the red talisman. All of a sudden, 4 streaks of red light blossomed in unison, and a terrifying might swept through the surroundings. Even though all of the cultivators present were Yu Yao, they couldn't help but feel their bodies and minds sway uncontrollably. All they could do was channel their power to protect themselves. After a short while, the power of their respective red talismans was pushed to the limit. To everyone's surprise, Blazing Heaven continued to stand there quietly, as if he didn't move at all. Instead, he looked at everyone with a pitiful expression. "Kill?" Hu Dequan roared as he activated the power of his red talisman. The red light condensed and transformed into a sharp blade that slashed towards Blazing Heaven. At the same time, Yang Ling attacked as well. His red talisman transformed into a ferocious and terrifying primordial ferocious beast. It was lifelike, and it roared as it charged towards Blazing Heaven like a bolt of lightning. The horn on its forehead flickered with red light as if it could destroy everything in the world. Meng Su's red talisman was slightly different from the other two. It was purely a huge palm print, and with every inch it pressed down, even the space around it was shattered. Hu Dequan and Yang Ling, who were the first to attack, suddenly turned their heads and looked at Meng Su in astonishment. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. At the same time, the expressions of the cultivators standing beside Lu Yi changed drastically. They suddenly felt as if a great disaster was about to befall them. An incomparably strong aura of death lingered around them, causing their bodies to stiffen. They instinctively wanted to dodge, but the space around them had frozen. Lu Yi sighed. When the red light spread out, a layer of red light enveloped his body, turning into a solid defense. The huge palm print pressed down. The 7 or 8 cultivators of the Red Talisman Association beside Lu Yi could only barely resist for a moment before their bodies exploded and died with despair. Even Lu Ye's bones creaked from the pressure of the palm print. The red light on his body dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Although he had activated the defensive red talisman with the help of his precious blood, Meng Su's red talisman had been nourished for too long. Its power was incomparably terrifying. It seemed that the defensive red talisman alone was somewhat difficult to resist. Meng Su's expression was also astonished because he didn't expect that the red talisman that Lu Yi had activated was actually used for defense. Logically speaking, everyone should have activated the offensive red talisman at this time. After all, they had to join forces to kill Blazing Heaven. However, before the red talisman's power was fully activated, he didn't know what type of red talisman Lu Yi had activated. He only had his own preconceived judgment. He was just a little puzzled. Why would Lu Yi activate the defensive red talisman at this time? What was he guarding against? What are you doing? Yang Ling roared. Although he had already made a judgment, he still couldn't believe it. That was his brother who had been with him for 2,000 years. He didn't understand why Lu Yi would do this, nor did he know when Lu Yi had changed sides. Before this, neither he nor Hu Duquan had noticed at all. As Yang Ling's words fell, Lu Yi, who was wrapped in a dim red light, finally moved. He activated the vertical sweep technique. Everyone only felt their vision blur, followed by the flash of a blade. When they came back to their senses, Lu Yi was already standing not far from Meng Su. The smear of blood on his pitch-black long blade was extremely eye-catching. It could be said that Meng Su had been caught off guard. From his point of view, when he activated the red talisman, Lu Yi and many of the cultivators around him would have been reduced to dust. No Yu Yao could survive the power of such a red talisman. However, Lu Yi had activated the defensive red talisman and blocked this terrifying blow, saving his life. Meng Su staggered back, his hand clutching his chest. He could clearly feel that his internal organs had been completely pulverized. Lu Ye's blade was incomparably fast and ferocious. It had directly cut off his chances of survival. However, with the powerful vitality of a late-stage Yu Yao, he wouldn't die so quickly. Feeling the arrival of death like this was undoubtedly an extremely torturous and terrifying thing. He looked at Lu Yi in disbelief. How did you find out? When he should have activated the offensive red talisman, Lu Yi had activated the defensive red talisman. This was clearly a precaution, so Meng Su understood that Lu Yi must have sensed something. Lu Yi turned a deaf ear to his question, nor did he have any intention of explaining. He only looked regretfully at the place where the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association had been standing beside him just now. There was only a pile of dismembered corpses left. When he had secretly subdued Zhou Tianbao, Lu Yi had already learned of a secret. Blazing Heaven had planted a spy in the Red Talisman Association. However, Zhou Tianbao didn't know who this person was. Lu Yi had been secretly investigating the Red Talisman Association during his time in contact with them, but to no avail. He hadn't been able to find any clues about the various conflicts with the Saint Blood Mountain. He only knew that this spy was extremely well hidden, and there was a high probability that this spy was one of the leaders of the Red Talisman Association. This was because an ordinary cultivator wouldn't be able to overthrow the Red Talisman Association. Yang Ling, Hu Duquan, and Meng Su were all under his suspicion. However, he couldn't say this out loud. If he did, it would only make them suspect his motives. Compared to a cultivator tainted by the divine attribute, the Red Talisman Association would undoubtedly trust their own cultivator more. It was only when Meng Su impatiently activated the Red Talisman that Lu Yi vaguely came to a conclusion. However, there was one thing that Lu Yi couldn't understand. Meng Su definitely hadn't been tainted by the divine attribute, because when he activated the divine attribute, he hadn't been suppressed at all. Since that was the case, why would he cooperate with Blazing Heaven and submit to him? Moreover, this should have happened in the last 10 years, otherwise the Red Talisman Association would have been long gone. Why? Hu Duquan's gaze trembled as he looked at Meng Su. His face was extremely pale. Meng Su's sudden betrayal left him at a loss of who he could trust in this world. Meng Su's vitality was extremely dim. He looked at Hu Duquan for a long time before saying, "We can't win. I just want to live." Hu Duquan's gaze became unfocused, and then he flew into a rage. Blazing Heaven is going to die soon. After so many years of conflict, there will be an end to it. Who told you that we can't win? Meng Su opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but his vitality was completely extinguished at this moment. Hu Duquan's face was filled with grief, and Yang Ling wasn't any better. The remaining Red Talisman Association cultivators were all paranoid. No one knew if there was a hidden traitor among them. Blazing Heaven isn't dead. Lu Ye's calm voice rang out. Only then did Hu Dequan and Yang Ling come back to their senses. They turned to look at blazing heaven. The power of the red talismans had dissipated, but what they saw made their eyes shrink. Blazing heaven was indeed not dead, although he looked a little battered. After all, he had blocked the power of 2 red talismans by himself. It was inevitable that he would be injured. Even his aura was somewhat weak. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and suddenly laughed loudly. His laughter was filled with mockery. You still want to win? Meng Su is right. You can't win. He joined me because he saw the truth, but you are all deceived by the falsehood. He stopped laughing and his voice became stern. No one can win. Blood Sea. Lu Yi shouted and took the initiative to activate the Blood Sea technique. Xiang Yin and the others came back to their senses, and they all dove into the Blood Sea. As their blood chi was activated, the Blood Sea, which was already quite large, suddenly expanded in all directions, enveloping the group of Red Talisman Association cultivators. Focus, kill blazing heaven first. Lu Ye's voice rang in the ears of the Red Talisman Association cultivators. Hu Dequan then shouted, kill blazing heaven. The Blood Sea surged, and in an instant, it covered a radius of 1,000 miles, and quickly spread towards blazing heaven's position. Strangely, blazing heaven didn't have any intention of dodging the Blood Sea's attack. Instead, he had a crazed look on his face. He opened his arms and made a hugging gesture and shouted wildly, good, good. In the next instant, his entire body was enveloped by the Blood Sea. Chapter 1802. The sea of blood surged and his magic power fluctuated. Lu Yi had pushed his saint nature to the limit. With him in the lead, the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association, as well as a group of blood servants, madly besieged blazing heaven in the sea of blood. Although they had suffered heavy losses in this battle, there were still more than 20 people alive and all of them were Yu Yao. If blazing heaven was at his peak, these cultivators alone might not be able to do anything to him. After all, he was Rizhao. It was like more than 20 star mansions fighting against one Yu Yao. If they didn't form an array, they would be easily defeated one by one. Moreover, blazing heaven's cultivation was higher, so he could fight whenever he wanted and escape whenever he wanted. He had an absolute advantage. However, under the suppression of Lu Ye's saint nature, blazing heaven's strength was greatly reduced. With the sea of blood sealing the area, he was doomed to die. However, the strange thing was that even in such a desperate situation, blazing heaven didn't panic at all. Instead, he laughed wildly. Facing the attacks from all directions, he didn't show any intention of defending. Instead, he met attacks with attacks. He didn't seem to care about his own life at all. The uneasiness in Lu Ye's heart had reached its peak. He was certain that blazing heaven still had something up his sleeve. Otherwise, how could the dignified Rizhao act like he wanted to die? Moreover, the words he said before were also thought-provoking. However, at this point in the battle, there was no turning back. No matter what blazing heaven's trump card was, he had to be killed first. The result of not defending was that blazing heaven's body continued to be injured. His flesh began to disintegrate, revealing his white bones. Casualties also appeared on his side. Under the suppression of Lu Ye's saint nature, blazing heaven's strength was far from his peak. However, the biggest difference between Rizhao and Yu Yao wasn't the increase in their physique or magic power, but their soul. In comparison, Rizhao's soul strength had reached a whole new level. Lu Yi could suppress his physical strength, but he couldn't suppress his soul strength. This led to the cultivators on his side being caught by Li Shang. Even if they didn't die, they would be injured. His terrifying soul power fluctuated wildly, constantly playing the sad song of death. Seeing the situation like this, Lu Yi didn't dare to delay any longer. He made a prompt decision and quickly retreated, far away from the area where the fierce battle was taking place. At the same time, he activated his magic power and a red light bloomed. Before he set off, the humanoid tribe had given him 3 red talismans. One was for attack, one was for defense, and the last one was for escape. It could be said to be extremely thorough. He had already used the defensive red talisman earlier, and now he was activating the offensive red talisman. Nightclubs were full of dreams. He wanted to use the red talisman to settle everything in one battle. Red light flashed, and even the luster of the blood sea could not hide this dazzling color. Lu Ye's aura rose crazily and his clothes trembled. The red light seemed to have a life of its own as it flowed towards the Pan Mountain saber in his hand. In the blink of an eye, the originally pitch-black Pan Mountain saber turned into a blood-red saber. Lu Yi held the saber in his hand, A powerful belief that everything in this world could be severed with a single slash of the saber appeared in his heart. Under the support of the red talisman, the Pan Mountain saber trembled. Lu Yi raised his other hand and gripped the saber's hilt with both hands. His spiritual sense surged in all directions as his body shot forward. After receiving his voice transmission, the cultivators who had been attacking Blazing Heaven quickly retreated in all directions. At this moment, Blazing Heaven, whose body was riddled with wounds, raised his head and looked towards Lu Yi. Even though he was separated by the sea of blood, he could still feel the ferocious power of the saber. He was still not afraid. The Blood Sea's powerful restrictive force was obviously afraid that he would escape, and so it wanted to bind him to the spot. However, he had no intention of escaping. Instead, he crazily surged his spiritual sense and attacked Lu Yi. In an instant, Lu Yi's spiritual sense was in turmoil. Fortunately, he had the Rainbow God Lotus to protect his spiritual sense. Therefore, he was able to withstand the attack of Blazing Heaven's spiritual sense. His body was wrapped in the red light. In the blink of an eye, he had covered a distance of 100 miles. The blood-red saber slashed down fiercely. Lu Yi wanted to activate his saber's power. However, under the support of the red talisman, the saber's power was too ferocious. He could not activate any saber's power. It was a simple and unadorned saber slash. After a slight tremor, the enormous sea of blood was instantly split apart like a piece of bloody tofu. The blood-red saber chi stretched for thousands of kilometers as if it wanted to cut open this space. Everywhere it passed, the meteorites and floating continents were reduced to dust. Muffled groans sounded. The blood servants had been hit by the saber chi, and all of them had turned pale. Although Lu Yi was the master of the Blood Sea, the blood servants had always been supporting him. When the saber slashed open the Blood Sea, they also suffered a backlash. The cultivators of the Red Talisman Association did not suffer any backlash, but under the powerful shockwaves, they were unable to stabilize themselves. It was not until several breaths later that the dazzling red light gradually disappeared. Everyone immediately looked towards Blazing Heaven. They wanted to know the result of this saber slash. What they saw excited them. This was because where Blazing Heaven had been, there was no longer a body of flesh and blood. There was only a skeleton left. Blazing Heaven was dead. Lu Yi stood not far from the skeleton. The mountain saber in his hand was still in a slashing posture. His brows were tightly furrowed. The situation was not right. The saber slash just now was so powerful that it was impossible for Blazing Heaven, who was suppressed by the divine attribute and heavily injured, to survive. This was something Lu Yi had expected. But why were his skeletal remains preserved? Logically speaking, even if this saber slash could not reduce Blazing Heaven to dust, it should have at least cut him in half. But his skeleton was unreasonably hard. Under such a slash there was no trace of damage. Lu Yi looked over and could not help but narrow his eyes. He discovered that on the eerie white bones, there were actually many crisscrossing and extremely complicated vein patterns spread out. The key was that these vein patterns gave him an incomparably familiar feeling. These were the patterns of the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. They covered every corner of Blazing Heaven's skeleton. Looking at these patterns, Lu Yi could not help but recall a piece of information he had heard from Zhou Tianbao. Blazing Heaven had been cultivating a secret technique and had only achieved some small success a few months ago. When he heard this news, Lu Yi immediately thought of the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. This thing had appeared with the appearance of the blood moon. If he could observe it, so could others. If there was a secret technique in this world that could interest a person like Blazing Heaven, it would undoubtedly be the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo that had appeared with the blood moon. When he was fighting with Blazing Heaven, Lu Yi had been wary of this because he had personally tried to activate the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo and knew how strange it was. But in fact, Blazing Heaven had not shown any signs of activating the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo. Lu Yi had not expected that Blazing Heaven would actually brand this Blood Eye Spirit tattoo onto his skeleton. To be able to accomplish this, Blazing Heaven's attainments in the Spirit Tattoo Dao were absolutely terrifying. This kind of difficulty was not something Yang Kai could compare with when he branded the same spirit tattoo onto his talent tree. The great advantage of branding a spirit tattoo onto a leaf of a talent tree was that even if something went wrong, it could still be modified. With such convenience, as long as Lu Yi knew the specific structure of a spirit tattoo, he could easily brand it onto a leaf of his talent tree and use it for his own use. Any other method of constructing spiritual tattoos would not work. It had to be done in one go. One could imagine how difficult it was to imprint such a complicated spiritual tattoo on one's bones offline. But he had actually done it? But what was strange was that Blazing Heaven had not activated the power of this spirit tattoo from beginning to end. Moreover, neither the Red Talisman Association nor his blood warriors had mentioned that Blazing Heaven was proficient in the spirit tattoo Dao. Lu Yi suddenly had a lot of doubts in his heart and couldn't figure out what Blazing Heaven's purpose was. But no matter what, Blazing Heaven was dead in the end. This battle, they had won. Looking around, there were less than 20 cultivators left in the messy battlefield. Just now, when they were fighting with Blazing Heaven, he had killed a few more. One had to know that there were originally more than 40 cultivators on their side, and the Saint Blood Peak had more than 100 cultivators on their side. But in just a few days of fighting, a large number of Yu Yao and Ri had died. Those who were still alive all felt that it was unreal. However, when Lu Yi saw the joy in Hu Dequan and the others' eyes, this joy quickly turned into surprise as they stared behind him. Lu Yi suddenly turned around and looked at Blazing Heaven's skeleton. At this moment, the white skeleton was blooming with a faint red light. This red light started from the ribs and quickly spread to the rest of his body. In an instant, the spirit tattoo branded on the skeleton was activated. This incomparably strange scene made Lu Yi completely unable to understand. Logically speaking, Blazing Heaven was already dead. No matter what he had branded on his skeleton before he died, it should not have been activated. But such a thing was happening right under his nose. Without any hesitation, the mountain saber returned to its sheath. Lu Yi grasped the saber hilt with one hand and assumed the posture of drawing the saber. His eyes became focused and his magic power began to hum. The moment the saber was unsheathed, the flesh on Lu Ye's right arm began to split open. Not only that, but his entire body also bore a tremendous burden. Saber drawing slash. A shocking saber light flashed. This was the strongest attack Lu Yi could use without using any external strength. With his middle Yu Yao cultivation, even if Blazing Heaven was still alive, such a close saber strike would not end well. But even so, this saber strike was unable to damage the skeleton in the slightest. Lu Yi could clearly feel that his saber strike was blocked by the strange red light. As the saber slashed out, the skeleton was instantly sent flying. In the surrounding space, an inexplicable strength seemed to be attracted by the skeleton, gathering towards it. Lu Yi focused his senses and quickly realized that this was the enormous blood and qi that had escaped from Blazing Heaven's body after his death. As Blazing Heaven's blood and qi was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. At this moment, the blood and qi that had already escaped was clearly attracted by some kind of power. It enveloped the skeleton and turned into a not-so-dense blood ball. End of chapter. Chapter 1803. What's going on? Hu Dequan flew over and asked. I'm not sure. Lu Yi shook his head, but it's definitely not a good thing. Blazing Heaven's actions before his death were too strange. Now that he thought about it, Blazing Heaven seemed to have taken the initiative to seek death. Not only that, but he also didn't care about the lives of the cultivators under his command. Otherwise, with Sacred Blood Peak's background, their side wouldn't have won so easily. Combined with the current situation, Lu Yi couldn't help but make a bold guess. Blazing Heaven really did have a backup plan, but this backup plan would only be effective after his death. This was very strange. If a person was already dead, what was the point of having a backup plan? Without any time to think about it, Lu Yi shouted, "Attack together!" No matter what Blazing Heaven's backup plan was, they couldn't allow him to do as he wished. So, as long as they could break the blood sphere that wrapped the skeleton and find a way to destroy it, no matter what Blazing Heaven's plan was, it would be useless. Having just won a victory, the many cultivators didn't even have time to catch their breath before attacking together, bombarding the blood sphere with attacks. However, what made them helpless was that no matter how fierce their attacks were, they couldn't shake the blood sphere in the slightest, only causing it to tremble in the void. All of a sudden, Lu Yi stopped and spread out his divine sense. He vaguely sensed that something was approaching from all directions. Soon he realized what it was. It was a blood vitality that was dissipating into the surrounding space, and the source of this blood vitality was the remains of the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators after they died. In the previous battle, after the Blood Warriors killed the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators, they didn't dare to casually refine their blood vitality because the blood vitality of the Sacred Blood Peak cultivators also contained a saint attribute. Rashly refining this blood vitality would be risky for the Blood Warriors. This was different from when they bathed in the blood rain and refined the weak saint attribute contained in it. If the Blood Warriors didn't refine this blood vitality, it would naturally remain in the area where the cultivators died. Lu Yi never expected that this residual blood vitality would actually gather here at this moment, and the source of this gathering was undoubtedly the strange blood sphere. It seemed to have the ability to draw in the saint attribute blood vitality. Just blazing heaven's blood vitality wrapped around the skeleton was enough to create such a situation. If this blood vitality were to be drawn in, who knew what would happen? Lu Yi hurriedly shouted, "Stop the blood and qi." The cultivators who were attacking the blood balls were startled when they heard this. They quickly investigated and found the problem. They immediately tried to stop it. Lu Yi even spread out his blood sea, transforming it into a river of blood, and together with the other blood warriors, sealed off a large area. However, despite their efforts, they were unable to completely block off the blood essence that was being attracted from all directions. Streams of blood essence continued to enter the blood ball, causing the color of the blood ball to become denser. Not only that, but the surface of the blood ball was also covered in complicated patterns. A strange aura emanated from the blood ball. Lu Yi stole a glance at the blood ball and was extremely anxious, but there was nothing he could do. In just a few dozen breaths of time, the blood sphere began to shine with a brilliant red light. Moreover, its surface was covered with lines that illuminated the surrounding area. At this moment, the blood sphere was no different from the blood moon that Lu Yi had observed from the outside. Moreover, the lines within the blood sphere were intertwined with one another, making the blood sphere look like a wide-open eye. The blood and qi no longer converged towards the blood sphere. Those that could be intercepted had been intercepted, and those that could not be intercepted had been absorbed by the blood sphere. It was also at this moment that the void trembled and hummed. It was as if a powerful force had descended from an unknown place and landed on the blood sphere. The blood sphere's dazzling light instantly shone brightly. All the cultivators who were staring at the blood sphere were in a daze at this moment, their spirit seas becoming restless. Lu Yi was also affected, but it was much milder than the others. He stared at the blood sphere that was violently changing and absorbing power from an unknown place. At this moment, many of his doubts were suddenly answered. Blazing Heaven was not proficient in the Tao of Spirit runes, so ever since he entered this world, the Red Talisman Association had only mentioned this matter to the blood warriors. Otherwise, it was impossible for no one to not tell him such important information. Blazing Heaven was able to inscribe the complete Blood Eye Spirit rune on his bones not because of his own ability, but because a certain will was secretly assisting him. Only then could he accomplish this almost impossible task. He didn't care about his own life or death. It wasn't that he didn't want to live or wasn't afraid of death, but that he had been influenced by a certain will. His death, and even the deaths of the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain, were all in preparation for this moment. That will was about to descend into the source space. That will was the will of the blood ancestors' treasure blood. Only it could make someone like Sunshine be willing to die for it. When he met with Feng Lao before, Feng Lao had said that the blood ancestors' treasure blood could not enter this place. So, if it wanted to invade the source space, it could only rely on the continuous deaths of the cultivators of St. Blood Mountain. After these cultivators died, the remnant holiness would slowly infect the source space of Minuscule Mountain. This was the scene that Lu Yi had seen at the beginning. However, with his help, the situation of the source space had become much better. This space had been sealed by the source space, so it wasn't easy for the blood ancestors' treasure blood to descend. Otherwise, it would have succeeded long ago. According to its previous method, perhaps after many more years, the source space would be completely corroded by the holiness sooner or later. Once that happened, the source space would no longer have the power to seal it. The source space would be contaminated, and the core world would be controlled by the blood ancestors' will. However, that would take too long, and the blood ancestors' will was clearly impatient. Looking at it this way, the information that Lu Yi had first heard from Xiang Yin was correct. Xiang Yin had said that if there was a day when the Red Talisman Association and St. Blood Mountain had a victor, the seal of this world would be broken. This was something that should happen because fundamentally speaking, the struggle between the Red Talisman Association and St. Blood Mountain was a struggle between the source space and the blood ancestors' will. No matter who won in the end, there would be no need for the seal of this world. At this moment, the blood ancestors' will was using Sunshine's skeleton as a basis and the blood and qi of many first-generation blood race cultivators as a foundation to construct the Blood Eye Spirit Tattoo in the source space. This spirit tattoo alone wouldn't be very useful, but it could resonate with the blood ancestors' will outside and guide it. As a result, there was a flaw in the seal of the source space. The blood ancestors' will could use Blazing Heaven's skeleton as a basis to descend here. Perhaps it wasn't just the will that descended, but also the drop of blood ancestors' will. Many thoughts flashed through Lu Ye's mind, and he immediately understood one thing. This time they were in big trouble. He had thought that killing Blazing Heaven would be the end of the war, but who would have thought that it was just the beginning of a nightmare? Looking around, whether it was his subordinates or the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association, all of them had pale faces and were trembling. They had obviously been affected by the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo, and the great terror brought about by the descent of the Blood Ancestors made it impossible for them to resist. This was especially true for the Blood Ancestors, who had all turned into soft-footed shrimps. This was the natural suppression of their bloodlines. Although Lu Yi wasn't that weak, under the influence of the Blood Eye Spirit tattoo, his spirit sea was churning. If it weren't for the protection of the seven-colored divine lotus, his situation wouldn't have been any better than the others. Under such circumstances he couldn't do anything to stop it. Bitterness filled his heart. Blazing Heaven was right, no one could win this battle. The people of St. Blood Peak had all died, and the Red Talisman Society and Blood Warriors hadn't survived either. Once the Blood Ancestors' precious blood descended here, it was likely this space would no longer have any vitality. Suddenly the light of the blood ball became extremely dazzling. Then, in a situation where no one could see it, it twisted and transformed. The light dissipated, and the great terror that enveloped their bodies and minds also disappeared. The turbulent divine sea calmed down, and under this contrast the cultivators all coughed up blood. Lu Yi was no exception. He raised his hand to wipe the corner of his mouth and focused his gaze in front of him. As far as he could see, the blood ball had disappeared. What replaced it was a slender and graceful figure. She was completely naked and her curves were smooth. Strangely, there was no temptation at all. Instead, it was filled with an exaggerated sense of explosiveness. It was a tall woman with long blood-red hair that covered her back. Her skin was fair and her eyes were blood-red. However, there were lines in her pupils as if two miniature blood moons were embedded in them. Lu Ye's heart thumped wildly. Even though he already knew that the Blood Ancestors' precious blood had given birth to its own will, he still couldn't believe what he was seeing. One had to know that the Blood Ancestor had died many years ago. Her body had been split into several pieces and turned into several realms, but a drop of her precious blood had strangely survived. Could this be considered the Blood Ancestor's precious blood clone? Could this be considered a rebirth from a drop of blood? In his shock, Lu Yi quickly discovered something. The eyes of this precious blood clone weren't clear, and there was a sense of ignorance and chaos in them. He immediately understood that Feng Lao was right. Although the Blood Ancestor's precious blood had given birth to its own will, this will wasn't complete, and it was still in an ignorant state. It seemed that the Blood Ancestors planned to use Blazing Heaven's skeleton and the blood chi of many first-generation blood race cultivators to create a body and descend here wasn't something she could complete. Blazing Heaven must have contributed to this. In the void, the figures of the Red Talisman Association and the Blood Servants stood still, all of them dumbfounded as they stared at the precious blood clone that had suddenly appeared. None of them knew what was going on or why a living being had suddenly appeared. No one dared to act rashly. Even though the precious blood clone didn't seem to be a threat, the great terror it had brought to everyone when it had descended just now still lingered. Amidst this silence, the precious blood clone suddenly turned its head and looked in a certain direction, where Zhou Ran was standing. With just a glance, Zhou Ran felt as if a great disaster was about to befall her, and her expression became extremely terrified. On the other hand, the precious blood clone's ignorant eyes were filled with doubt, as if it had seen something strange. Then it stretched out its hand in Zhou Ran's direction and gently clenched it. A blood-red light burst out. End of this chapter. Chapter 1804. Zhou Ran, a late-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivator, had died just like that. The Blood Ancestor's precious blood clone clenched his fist and turned her into dust without any resistance. Her chi and blood drifted as if they were being drawn into the precious blood clone's body. Everyone felt their blood run cold when they saw this. No one had seen how the precious blood clone had done it. The moment she clenched her fist, no energy fluctuations had been released. However, Zhou Ran had still been squashed like an ant. This clearly didn't make sense. If the precious blood clone had displayed a powerful cultivator's radiance and killed Zhou Ran from a distance, it would have been understandable. However, what they saw just now didn't seem to be the case. Almost no one understood what had happened. Only Lu Yi had a faint insight into the truth. Zhou Ran was a first-generation blood race cultivator, and her divine nature came from the Blood Ancestor's precious blood clone. Therefore, when the precious blood clone descended, it could take away Zhou Ran's life. She was taking back her own power. Not only Zhou Ran, but all the blood warriors under Lu Ye's command were probably the same. This was because each of them had their own divine nature before Lu Ye's arrival. Just as Lu Yi thought so, the precious blood clone's gaze once again turned to the other blood warrior. When the blood warrior saw Zhou Ran's miserable end, he was terrified. He forcefully circulated his magic power and turned around to escape. However, it was too late. The blood ancestor's precious blood clone clenched his fist again, and the blood warrior of the midstage Moon Jade realm followed in Zhou Ran's footsteps. Run! Lu Yi saw that the situation wasn't right and hurriedly shouted. In the face of the blood ancestor's precious blood clone, the blood warriors couldn't do anything. On the contrary, they would only increase her power. The only thing they could do now was to escape. Even Lu Yi himself hurriedly retreated as soon as he finished speaking. In the blink of an eye, figures scattered in all directions. When the surviving cultivators of the Red Talisman Association saw this, they didn't dare to stay any longer and scattered like birds and beasts. The precious blood clone's performance was too shocking, and they couldn't even think of fighting back. It wasn't that they weren't brave enough. They had persevered for so many years, and they had already proven their courage by fighting against Blazing Heaven. However, Blazing Heaven's ability couldn't be compared to Blazing Heaven's avatar. As he fled, Lu Yi clearly noticed that his blood warriors were dying one by one, and only a moment later, only the Xiangyin sisters remained. At this moment, the two sisters were like frightened rabbits, desperately trying to escape. They fled in the same direction as Lu Yi because when Lu Yi shouted those words, they instinctively moved closer to Lu Yi, as if seeking some sense of security. However, they did not know that at this moment, even Lu Yi herself did not feel safe. High Lord! Xiangyin turned her desolate eyes towards Lu Yi, her face full of pleading. She had also noticed the deaths of the other blood warriors and knew that it would soon be her and her sister's turn. She also knew that in this situation the Great Lord was at his wit's end, but at this moment of life and death, she still instinctively turned to Lu Yi. Lu Ye's fleeing figure suddenly came to a stop, and he rushed over to them, raised his hand and hurriedly said, "Come in." As soon as this sentence was spoken, a strange portal suddenly appeared in the void. Xiangyin and Xianyu didn't hesitate at all, plunging headfirst into it and disappearing. Lu Yi quickly closed the portal, stood still, turned around, and looked back at the area where the blood ancestor's precious blood avatar was located. They couldn't escape. As Xiangyin and Xianyu were taken into the little flower world, Lu Yi clearly felt the precious blood avatar's gaze fall on him. She was undoubtedly aware that there was a strong divine attribute in her body. Staring at each other across the void, Lu Yi pushed his spirit chi to the limit to protect his body, his spiritual energy also surging fiercely. Spirit rune and divine rune defenses were madly constructed, layer upon layer. He didn't know if he could block the precious blood avatar's grasp, but he didn't want to sit still and wait for death. As he watched with rapt attention, the precious blood avatar raised his hand and gently clenched his fist. At this moment, Lu Ye's heart almost skipped a beat. However, he soon realized that he was fine. This was because he didn't feel anything abnormal, which meant that the precious blood avatar's absolute control of the divine attribute had no effect on him. Lu Yi let out a long breath, feeling as if he had just narrowly escaped death. However, he had expected this situation. When he was refining the blood ancestor's divine blood, the talent tree had burned away everything that was disadvantageous to him, leaving only what was useful to him. In other words, the brand that originally belonged to the blood ancestor had been refined by the talent tree, so although Lu Ye's divine attribute was still suppressed by the more powerful divine attribute, he was no longer subject to the blood ancestor's divine attribute like the blood warriors. This was the fundamental reason why he had been spared. In the distance, the blood ancestor tilted his head slightly with a puzzled expression. Obviously, he couldn't figure out why Lu Yi hadn't died like the other cultivators and was unscathed. However, the blood ancestor's ignorant spiritual intelligence didn't give her much ability to think, so when she saw that Lu Yi wasn't dead, she rushed towards him at an extremely fast speed. Lu Yi, who had just rejoiced at his narrow escape, realized that he was most likely doomed this time. He could ignore the precious blood avatar's control of the divine attribute, but if the precious blood avatar attacked him personally, there was nothing he could do. Even if the precious blood avatar couldn't display the blood ancestor's peak strength, even if it could only display 10% of it, it wasn't something Yu Yao could resist. As the precious blood avatar got closer and closer to him, Lu Yi suddenly caught a glimpse of a light from the corner of his eye. In the blink of an eye, the light arrived in front of him and hit the space he was in. The space around him rippled. At the same time, an old voice rang out in Lu Ye's ears. "Don't move." Lu Yi immediately recognized that it was Elder Fang's voice. He immediately stopped in his tracks and even retracted his magic power. The space around him distorted, and Lu Yi couldn't help but have an extremely strange feeling. It was as if he was in this world but also as if he wasn't. The Precious Blood Avatar rushed to a spot not far away from him. The Precious Blood Avatar's puzzled expression became even more puzzled. It kept looking left and right as if it was looking for Lu Yi. However, Lu Yi was clearly standing not far in front of it. Lu Yi held his breath. He knew that the Precious Blood Avatar had lost his position under Elder Fang's technique. After pondering for a moment, Lu Yi understood what was going on. After all, Elder Fang was the origin consciousness. Since it was the origin consciousness, it naturally had a certain degree of control over the power of this world, just like how Little Jiu could control the power of the 9 provinces. Although Fang Lao was suffering from the corrosion of the blood ancestor's precious blood and was unable to completely control this world like Little Nine, he could still interfere with the space at a critical moment and banish him into the depths of the space, helping him survive. Fortunately, the Precious Blood Avatar's intelligence wasn't high. Otherwise it could easily break Elder Fang's technique. After all, the blood ancestor's precious blood had been corroding this world for many years and had a certain degree of control over it. It could easily break this level of spatial banishment. In the location of the origin, where the Red Talisman Association's cultivators had set up a large formation to conceal it, light began to bloom and the origin's aura flowed out clearly. The Precious Blood Avatar, who was looking for Lu Yi with a puzzled expression, immediately turned her head and looked in the direction of the origin. In the next moment, her figure flashed like lightning, like a shark that had smelled blood, and she rushed towards the origin. Her action of rescuing Lu Yi had undoubtedly exposed the origin. After countless years of struggle, the treasured blood clone had finally arrived here with the help of Blazing Heaven. His goal was nothing more than to erode the origin. That was the will that the blood ancestor had left in the treasured blood. It was the first thing that the treasured blood clone needed to do. She couldn't enter this space, so all of her corrosion of this world was superficial. Today she had finally broken through the blockade with the help of Blazing Heaven's deployment. After sensing the origin's aura, she naturally couldn't wait. In the blink of an eye, the Precious Blood Avatar flew away. The power that had banished Lu Yi also disappeared at this moment. The moment the abnormality in the surrounding space returned to normal, Lu Ye's figure reappeared. Looking around, there was no one there. After this battle, everyone from St. Blood Peak had died, and the Red Talisman Association had also suffered heavy losses. In the end, it seemed that only a dozen or so people had survived. As for his own blood warriors, only Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin, who had been taken into the Little Flower World, had survived. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of using the Little Flower World in the beginning, but that the blood ancestor had acted too quickly. Even if he had used the Little Flower World at the beginning, he wouldn't have been able to save many blood warriors. Moreover, the size of the Little Flower World was limited. In just 2 days of fighting, Yu Yao had suffered more than 100 casualties, and Ri had fallen alone. This was definitely the second most tragic battle Lu Yi had ever participated in. The first was the battle outside the Four-Way Galaxy against the Insect and Blood Race armies. In that battle, even Ri had died several times. Lu Yi looked in the direction of the origin again, but he couldn't see anything. There was no light, no aura, and he couldn't even detect the aura of the Precious Blood Avatar. He wanted to see the situation over there, but he didn't dare to rush over casually. He could imagine that the Origin's consciousness should be fighting with the Precious Blood Avatar at this moment. However, this kind of struggle wasn't a simple battle, but rather a contest on a deeper level. After thinking about it, Lu Yi sent out a message. After waiting for a while, Yang Ling and Hu Dequan led the remaining Red Talisman Association cultivators and rushed over to meet up with him. Seeing that Lu Yi was still alive, Yang Ling looked relieved. Just now he had also fled. When he looked back, he saw the Precious Blood Avatar chasing after Lu Yi. He had thought that Lu Yi would undoubtedly die, but who would have thought that he would survive? It could be said that he was lucky in the midst of misfortune. That woman. What is she? Hu Dequan still had some lingering fear, mainly because the deaths of the blood warriors under Lu Yi were too bizarre. Moreover, they had been in this world for many years, but they had never seen that woman. It was obviously unreasonable to say that St. Blood Peak had such a powerhouse. If that was the case, How could the Red Talisman Association have a foothold in this world? Chapter 1805. From the perspective of the Red Talisman Association, the Blood Ancestor's precious blood clone seemed to have appeared out of nowhere, and the process of its appearance was extremely bizarre. "It's the Blood Ancestor's precious blood clone," Lu Yi replied. "Precious blood clone?" The group of Red Talisman Association cultivators revealed surprised expressions. Those of the blood race who possess divine nature can cultivate a secret technique that allows them to refine their own blood essence and condense precious blood. After further refinement, they can turn into a clone. I believe everyone knows that the Blood Ancestor's shadow was behind the splitting of Fangsuan Mountain. The Blood Ancestor left a drop of his precious blood here, intending to invade the core and take it for himself. After so many years, that drop of blood gave birth to its own intelligence and continued the will of the Blood Ancestor. After listening to Lu Ye's explanation, everyone finally understood the origin of that strange woman. They also finally understood why cultivators would possess divine nature after being bathed in the blood rain of this world. It was because they had been infected by the power of the Blood Ancestor's precious blood. Blazing Heaven had already planned to sacrifice himself in today's battle, because this was the only way to help the precious blood clone descend into the inner world. As for the cultivators of the Sacred Blood Mountain, Blazing Heaven didn't care about their lives at all. Even if they didn't die at the hands of the Red Talisman Association cultivators, the Sacred Blood Mountain's cultivators would be completely slaughtered when the precious blood clone descended. For the precious blood clone, all the first-generation blood race cultivators were nutrients to strengthen herself, and she had an instinctive desire for them. After hearing all this, the group of Red Talisman Association cultivators rejoiced in their hearts. After so many years of perseverance, some of them had been shaken. As members of the Red Talisman Association, they had been hiding here and there like rats. They had to face the suppression of the Sacred Blood Mountain everywhere, and they also lacked cultivation resources. There were always people who betrayed them, but today they were finally glad that they had persevered. The beliefs that they had pursued for so many years had finally paid off. Otherwise, how could they still be alive? "What's the situation now?" Wu Dequan asked again. "Where is the precious blood clone?" Lu Yi looked in the direction of the origin and said, "She should have gone to invade the origin." Once these words were spoken, everyone's expressions became somewhat grave. Even though they didn't know the mysteries behind it, everyone knew that once the precious blood clone was allowed to infect the source, the world would definitely be turned upside down. They had been fighting against the Sacred Blood Mountain for countless years, and they had barely been able to gain a foothold. However, if their essences were contaminated by the blood progenitor's power, they would have no chance of surviving. Most importantly, they couldn't leave this place at all. In the past, when they were fighting in the Black Abyss, as long as they could hold on long enough, all the invading enemies would be expelled from this space and they would naturally be able to leave. But this time, everyone from St. Blood Peak had died. They didn't see any hope of leaving. Furthermore, with the current situation, they couldn't leave. "What should we do?" Yang Ling asked. Although he didn't know what to do, he couldn't just wait there. Lu Yi shook his head. To be honest, he didn't know what to do now. Previously, he had used the power of the talent tree to help alleviate the corrosion of the origin. Therefore, the talent tree could play a role in the battle between the origin and the Blood Ancestor's power. But the key was that the precious blood clone was too strong. He had managed to preserve his life with great difficulty under Elder Fang's protection, so how could he dare to casually approach it? At that moment, there was a sudden change in the direction of the origin. As the void trembled, red and white light suddenly bloomed, illuminating the entire space. Everyone turned their heads and looked in that direction. Even though they couldn't see the specific situation over there, they could vaguely infer the advantages and disadvantages of the confrontation just by looking at the changes in the two colors. The white light undoubtedly represented the origin's power, while the red light represented the precious blood clone. This was very easy to distinguish. At that moment, the confrontation over there suddenly entered an extremely intense level. However, what made everyone worried was that the red light clearly had the absolute advantage, and the white light was being eroded by a large amount. Looking from afar, it was like a snow-white canvas being rapidly dyed red. In less than half an hour, there was no longer any white in sight. Instead, it was all red. Everyone's hearts sank to the bottom. However, at that moment, a dazzling white light suddenly seeped out of the red light, which was as dense as blood. It was incomparably bright. Everyone couldn't help but feel excited and expectant. The red and white light intertwined endlessly, and soon they mixed together and became indistinguishable. Then the distant light rapidly enlarged in their field of vision. "Why, is it coming toward us?" Hu Dequan quivered and his expression became flustered. In this kind of confrontation between big shots, Yu Yao was just a small fry. "Hurry up and get out of the way," Yang Ling shouted, and the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association quickly scattered. Lu Yi didn't move because when the red and white light flew toward him, Elder Fang's anxious voice rang out in his mind. "Kid, I've already merged with her and can be considered to have completely trapped her. The rest is up to you. Open your spirit ocean." In an instant, Lu Yi saw through Elder Fang's plan. Elder Fang obviously knew about the powerful refining power of the innate skill tree, so he placed his last hope on Lu Yi. This was probably why he had saved Lu Yi at the critical moment. From his point of view, only the Dao tree bloodline could completely deal with the blood ancestors' treasured blood. No one else could. He had fought against the blood ancestors' treasured blood for countless years and had always been at a disadvantage. He had no hope of victory. Lu Ye's arrival had undoubtedly given him this opportunity. He had originally planned to wait until this battle in the Black Abyss was over before carefully formulating a plan with Lu Yi. In that plan, he was confident that he could borrow Lu Ye's strength to resolve the crisis that had plagued him for countless years. However, things didn't go as he wished. The precious blood clone had descended into the origin space. In this moment of crisis, there was no need to talk about a plan. He could only take a gamble. While saving Lu Yi, he had exposed his own aura and attracted the precious blood clone to corrode him. At this moment, not only did the origin space contain its own power, but the precious blood had also completely integrated into it. If there were no external interference, it wouldn't take long for the precious blood clone to completely corrode the origin space and allow the precious blood clone to take control of it. However, the precious blood clone didn't realize that this method had bound her hands and feet. The origin space was now like a cage trapping her inside. If the precious blood clone had enough spiritual intelligence, she might have been able to detect some clues. However, her spiritual intelligence was still muddled, so how could she resist Elder Fang's scheme? Lu Yi had already opened his spirit sea. The next moment he saw a ball of light fly in front of him and crash into his body. Even though Elder Fang had tried his best to control it, the powerful force was still not something Lu Yi could withstand. The moment it hit him, he felt all the bones in his body shatter. He felt dizzy and his whole body was sent flying. He was so dizzy that he almost fainted. He couldn't even feel the pain in his body. Then Elder Fang's voice rang in his ears. "Wake up. Don't fall asleep." Lu Yi bit the tip of his tongue and barely woke up. Then he steadied his body and checked his condition. After confirming that he wouldn't die, he hurriedly immersed himself in his consciousness. The next moment, his soul avatar appeared in his spirit sea. Looking up, a ball of red and white light was imprinted in his field of vision. It was undoubtedly the manifestation of the origin space. When Lu Yi first saw it, it was only covered with a faint layer of blood mist, but now its appearance had completely changed. Because he was in his spirit sea, Lu Yi could clearly feel that there were two powerful wills fighting in this ball of light. Red and white were constantly changing, and turbulence swept in all directions. The seawater turned into waves. Even with the suppression of the multicolored lotus blooming with multicolored light, there were some signs of it being unable to stop. Quickly refine it. Elder Fang's voice sounded at this moment, like a shocking thunder. Lu Yi was about to activate the power of the talent tree when he suddenly realized a problem. "Elder Fang, if I refine it, what will you do?" At this moment, the blood ancestor's precious blood wasn't the only thing trapped in the origin space. If Lu Yi refined it, he could indeed refine the power of the precious blood, but in this way the consciousness of the origin space would also be refined. It was impossible to say that Lu Yi would only refine the precious blood and not the origin space. The two were already mixed together and couldn't be separated. Elder Fang's voice sounded. "I am very gratified that you can ask this question. However, there is no such thing as a perfect solution in this world. I used my body as a cage to restrain this fiend, and I don't want to fail at the last moment. Just refine it, don't worry about me." Lu Yi didn't say anything. Elder Fang knew what he was thinking and couldn't help but sigh. You should know that if the origin space is corroded by the blood ancestor's power and then escapes, the entire minuscule mountain will be plunged into misery and suffering. Moreover, as long as minuscule mountain still exists, the origin space will give birth to a new consciousness sooner or later. However, that consciousness might not be Elder Fang. Lu Ye's expression was solemn as he said in a low voice, "Elder Fang, I'm sorry to offend you. As he spoke, the talent tree's phantom suddenly appeared behind his soul avatar. The towering tree's countless leaves burned fiercely. Countless roots extended from the tree's roots like living creatures, piercing into the origin space. The refining had begun. A large amount of black smoke rose from the talent tree. This was undoubtedly the power of the blood ancestor. It wasn't an impurity, but something harmful to Lu Yi. As if it had a consciousness, the precious blood's consciousness in the origin space violently resisted, causing the entire origin space to become restless. It made Lu Ye's divine sea feel as if doomsday had arrived. The seven-colored divine lotus's light became increasingly dazzling. The light was like an invisible hand, calming the turbulence in Lu Ye's divine sea and reducing the pressure on him. Within the origin space, Elder Fong was also fiercely exerting his power to suppress the precious blood. Only now did Lu Yi have the time to spare to take out some healing pills and consume them to heal the injuries on his body. Then he took out a large number of fire-type treasures and began refining them. He secretly rejoiced that he had prepared a large number of fire-type treasures in advance. Otherwise, with such a consumption rate, the talent tree's refining might not have lasted for long. Chapter 1806. At the beginning of the refinement process, Lu Ye's deity ocean was in turmoil, and waves swept across it. Although the intelligence born from the blood ancestor's precious blood was ignorant, it was instinctive to avoid harm. The refinement of the talent tree made it sense danger, so it naturally struggled endlessly. Lu Yi couldn't suppress it with his strength alone. However, the origin will used its body as a cage, and the precious blood had tried to infect the origin will. This caused it to fuse closely with the origin will. Unless it could completely suppress the origin will, it couldn't be separated from the origin will. The reaction in the deity ocean was a direct result of the origin will and the precious blood's resistance. During the continuous refinement process, the talent tree's fuel reserves were constantly being consumed. Lu Yi could sense that there was a mysterious energy within the origin will turning into his own nutrients. The most obvious change was that he could clearly sense that his own divine nature was rapidly and terrifyingly improving. This was only natural. The blood race's divine nature originated from the blood ancestor. How terrifying was the divine nature contained within a drop of the blood ancestor's precious blood. Since ancient times, no living creature had ever had such an opportunity. But now Lu Yi had coincidentally obtained it. His divine nature continued to improve, bringing him a deeper understanding of the blood race's secret techniques. It was as if many of the mysteries of the blood race's secret techniques had been sealed in his body since birth. As his divine nature improved, they were revealed. In the past, his divine nature was powerful enough that no blood race member in the world could compare to it. However, he had never put much thought into the blood race's secret techniques. So, even if his divine nature was powerful, there should be many blood race members who could surpass him in terms of mastery of the blood race's secret techniques. But now, things were different. Lu Yi felt that even those blood race members who had lived for countless years couldn't compare to him in terms of mastery of the blood race's secret techniques. This was a passive improvement in the process of refining the precious blood. If he spent more time on this path in the future, the effects would be even better. Day after day of refinement, the activity in the deity ocean began to decrease. Lu Yi could clearly sense that within the origin will, Elder Fong's will, and the precious blood's will, were continuously being worn down and weakened. 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. Within the origin space, Lu Yi sat cross-legged, motionless. Yang Ling stood guard at the side. He wasn't the only one. All of the surviving cultivators of the Red Talisman Association were gathered nearby. For the past 3 years they had been stuck here. They had tried to find a way out, but unfortunately they had found nothing. At first they had panicked. In the past, when they were fighting against Sacred Blood Peak, they had been in a bad situation, but at least they had some freedom. But in this source space they didn't even have freedom, and there weren't many cultivation resources. Everyone almost thought that they would be trapped here until they died. It wasn't until one day that Lu Yi, who was busy, sent a message to Hu Dequan and briefly explained the situation. Only then did everyone relax and wait here. He waited for 3 years. Until today, Lu Yi suddenly opened his eyes. The light in his eyes was a little unfocused, as if a lifetime had passed. He didn't expect that it would take him so long to refine the origin source. The reason was that he didn't have enough fuel for the talent tree. If he did not care about the consequences and used all his strength to refine it, the efficiency would be faster, but the fuel consumption of the talent tree would be greater, and there would be a lot of unnecessary waste. So he could only control the efficiency of the refinement and ensure that the talent tree could use the fuel. This way he would spend more time. Fortunately, 3 years of hard work had paid off. Now that the talent tree's fuel had been used up, and although the blood ancestor's precious blood in the source space hadn't been completely refined, the will of the precious blood had been completely obliterated. So, there wasn't much of a problem. He only needed to replenish the talent tree's fuel and spend some more time refining it. Hu Dequan, who was at the side, faintly sensed something and looked over. He said in pleasant surprise, "Brother Lu, you're finally awake." Yang Ling also hurriedly looked over and asked anxiously, "What's the situation now?" Lu Yi was dazed for a moment before saying, "There's basically no problem." Everyone was overjoyed, their faces filled with anticipation and excitement. Hu Dequan stammered for a moment but still couldn't help but ask, "Then the will of the source space." Lu Yi was silent for a while before saying, "I'll open the seal of this space. Let's talk about it after we leave." The seal and opening of the source space was originally controlled by Feng Lao. Now that Feng Lao was no longer here and Lu Yi had basically refined the source space, he could naturally control it. As he spoke, he thought of something. The cultivators of the Red Talisman Association, who had waited for 3 years, felt the world change. When they came back to their senses, they were already back in the inner world. In the next moment, ripples appeared in the void. Lu Yi stepped out, followed by the 2 remaining blood servants. "We're finally back." Yang Ling looked like he had just escaped death. He let out a long breath. Being trapped in the source space for 3 years had really suffocated him. Hu Dequan looked at the surviving cultivators of the Red Talisman Association and sighed. Before the battle 3 years ago, there were more than 40 people on their side. Now there were only a dozen of them. Fortunately, everyone from the St. Blood Mountain was wiped out. From now on, there would be no more opponents in the world. Soon, Hu Dequan thought of a question. "Brother Lu, can we also break the seal of this world? Can we go home now?" Whether they were sent here by the Miniman tribe or accidentally wandered into this world, they had been here for too many years. They had been fighting against the St. Blood Mountain all this time. Now that they had won, they naturally wanted to leave as soon as possible. Lu Yi sensed for a moment and nodded, "Anytime. But please wait for a moment. I need to make some preparations." The seal of the inner world was Feng Lao's doing. He borrowed the power of the spectacle outside to isolate the attraction of the inner world to the other 3 parts of Fangsuan Mountain. If not for this, Fangsuan Mountain would have already merged into one place. However, if this was really the case, it would be a disaster for the Miniman tribe because the power of the blood ancestors' precious blood would definitely spread to the entire Fangsuan Mountain. Feng Lao's actions were to protect the Miniman tribe. Now that Lu Yi had refined the source space and controlled the power of this world, he could naturally break the seal of the inner world. "No problem. Then I'll wait for your good news." Yang Ling replied happily. The people of the Red Talisman Association left, but the Xiang sisters stayed behind to wait on him. When they thought of Zhou Ran and Wang Taixing who had died in battle, they couldn't help but feel sad. Although before Lu Ye's arrival, the sisters had fought with him from time to time, they still had a tacit understanding of the general direction. When Wang Taixing first joined Lu Yi, he only had one wish, and that was to leave this damned place before he died. He was willing to sincerely join because compared to Li Tian, he thought more highly of Lu Yi who had a strong divine aura. Unfortunately, this wish didn't come true in the end. During the battle that day, if Lu Yi hadn't taken the risk to activate the Little Flower Realm to take them in, the sisters wouldn't have survived. After a moment, Lu Yi opened his eyes and revealed a thoughtful expression. Xian Yu stepped forward. "Lord, do you have any instructions?" Lu Yi shook his head and looked in a certain direction. "There's a spirit jade mine over there. You can go and cultivate." There were no more enemies in this world, so there was no need for them to wait on him. Moreover, even if there were enemies with Lu Ye's current special status in this world, he could suppress them with a flip of his hand. After saying that, Lu Yi leaped and disappeared into thin air. The sisters glanced at each other before flying in the direction Lu Yi indicated. Sure enough, they found the spirit jade mine. At this moment, Lu Yi had already jumped out of the inner world and arrived in the outside world. The seal of the realm could seal other cultivators, but it couldn't seal him. The surroundings were somewhat familiar, so he should be inside the illusory blood magic eye wonder. Lu Yi suddenly thought of a problem. The illusory blood magic eye wonder's name originated from the demon eye blink. According to the information he had, the demon eye blink was the manifestation of the blood ancestors' precious blood's power. Now that the blood ancestors' precious blood was gone, the demon eye blink most likely wouldn't appear in the inner world anymore. Although the inner world would still have the demon eye blink, it didn't live up to its name. Perhaps after a while, the cultivators in the inner world would be very confused as to why the demon eye blink no longer existed. However, this had nothing to do with Lu Yi anymore. He had perfectly completed the mission given to him by the humanoid race. Next, he had to follow his original plan and bring the core back to the Jade Conch Mountain. This way, the Jade Conch Mountain would have a powerful backer in a short period of time. They would no longer have to worry about any dangers erupting in the star system. However, looking at the core, which was about 100 feet long and looked like a fake mountain, Lu Yi felt a little troubled. How was he going to bring such a big thing back to the Jade Conch Mountain? After thinking about it, Lu Yi opened the small flower realm and tried to use the small flower realm to store it. If he succeeded, it would be convenient. However, the result disappointed Lu Yi. The small flower realm couldn't store the minuscule mountain core at all. Thinking about it, it wasn't strange. The small flower realm had a limit on the number of cultivators it could store. In fact, it wasn't very big. The minuscule mountain core didn't look very big, but it was still a realm. How could the small flower realm contain it? If the small flower realm couldn't store it, then there was no need to think about a storage ring. He couldn't possibly carry it, right? What kind of scandal was that? However, Lu Yi soon discovered that he seemed to be able to use this core as if it were a magic treasure. At the end of the day, it was still because he had refined the core's origin. Realizing this, Lu Yi felt relieved. Although it was a little ugly, as long as he could transport the core back to the Jade Conch Mountain, it wouldn't be a big problem. After planning his next move, Lu Yi already had a plan in mind. Soon, Lu Ye's voice sounded in the inner world. The realm seal has been broken. Fellow Taoists who want to leave can leave on their own. After saying that, a figure flew into the sky. Soon there were people following him. A moment later, all the cultivators of the Red Talisman Association appeared in front of Lu Yi. Although they had already received Lu Ye's confirmation before, they couldn't help but feel happy when they really got rid of the realm that had trapped them for many years. They felt like they had been reborn. Chapter 1807. Apart from Yang Ling and Hu Dequan, who were specially sent here by the humanoid race, the rest of the cultivators from the inner world had basically wandered in by accident. They had all come to the Wonder to train themselves. Everyone had their own origins. Now that they had jumped out of the rut, they naturally would not stay. Many cultivators expressed their gratitude to Lu Yi one by one, exchanging musical notes and imprints before bidding farewell. No matter what, all of them had experienced a life and death battle together, and this wasn't an ordinary relationship. Moreover, they persisted in staying in the Red Talisman Association under such a situation and didn't seek refuge with St. Blood Peak, and it was sufficient to display their character and disposition. It could be said that these cultivators who had survived would have great achievements in the future if nothing unexpected happened. Soon, most of the surviving cultivators from the Red Talisman Association had left. Lu Yi looked at Yang Ling and Hu Dequan who had stayed behind. "What are the two of you planning to do?" Yang Ling scratched his head. "I don't have any plans. I don't know where to go." They had known each other for quite some time. Lu Yi more or less knew about Yang Ling's situation. He had been adopted by the humanoid race since he was young and had also grown up in Fangsuan Mountain. Therefore, while the others could return to their own homes, he had no place to go. "Fellow Lu, now that the seal on the inner world has been broken, if we take the core away from this wonder, will the three parts of Fangsuan Mountain fuse together without the isolation of the wonder's power?" Yang Ling asked. "That's right. This is also my next plan." It was also a task given by the humanoid race. "Alright then. I'll stay in the inner world and wait for Fangsuan Mountain to fuse." He came from Fangsuan Mountain in the south. To him, the south was his home. Now that he could stay here and wait to see his family, he naturally did not want to waste too much effort. "Old Hu, what about you? Do you want to go back to your homeland to take a look?" Yang Ling turned to look at Hu Dequan. Hu Dequan pondered for a moment and shook his head. "There's nothing to see. I'll accompany you." Hu Dequan's situation was different from Yang Ling's. He was not adopted by the humanoid race since he was young. However, the miniature humans had their own choices when recruiting foreign cultivators. Generally, they would not recruit cultivators with strong backgrounds because they would be difficult to control. Therefore, they only recruited those with good potential but no background. The domain that Hu Dequan was born in was only a large domain, and he did not have any foundation in his homeland. Even if he returned after so many years, he was afraid that things would have changed. "Ha ha ha. Yang Ling laughed heartily and patted his shoulder. All right then, let's see who can advance to sunshine first. Hearing this, Lu Yi immediately reminded them, Gentlemen, don't try to refine any of the resources in the core region, especially the spirit jade mine. The will of the precious blood clone had been completely obliterated, but there were still remnants of the precious blood's power in the origin. All the resources in the domain had remnants of the divine nature, including the spirit jade mine. The Xiang sisters could use the spirit jade mine to cultivate, as they were first-generation blood kindred. However, Yang Ling and Hu Dequan could not, unless they wanted to be contaminated by the divine nature. This was undoubtedly not what they wanted. After all, they had persevered for so many years, and they could not break their perseverance after winning. As he spoke, Lu Yi handed over a storage ring. It's not much. Just use it. Once I settle down, you won't be short of resources. He originally had a lot of spirit jades and spirit crystals on him, but they were all for himself. When he came to the inner world, he gave the Red Talisman Association a batch of resources. Later, he joined forces with the Red Talisman Association and shared a part of it. Now he did not have many resources left. However, the fuel for the talent tree had been used up, and he did not plan to cultivate for the time being. Yang Ling happily took it. We're all brothers, so I won't stand on ceremony with you. Hu Dequan poked him and whispered, Not brothers? He did not forget that Lu Ye's cultivation companion was Su Yuqing. According to seniority, Lu Yi was his martial uncle. The two returned to the inner world. Lu Yi looked at the 10-feet-tall fake mountain in front of him, before leaping up and landing on it. With a thought, the core shot forward like an arrow from a bow. Along the way, meteorites and floating landmasses were smashed into pieces. Lu Yi had no intention of changing direction at all. He only drove the core under him like a star boat, and it was very easy to drive it. When driving the star boat, he had to at least activate his own magic power. However, he did not need to do that to drive the core. After refining the origin, Lu Yi felt as if the core had become a part of his body. Although there were still some barriers because he had not completely refined it, it did not affect him much. As for whether such an impact would damage the core, there was no need to worry at all. After all, it was a part of a starry sky treasure and it could not be damaged so easily. Since there was no need to worry and Lu Yi was in a hurry, he naturally pushed the core's speed to the limit that he could control. This was not the limit of speed, but the limit of Lu Ye's ability to adjust the direction when he encountered something ahead that he needed to avoid. It was not that he was afraid of damaging the core, but the road ahead was long. If he went too fast and ran into some realm, it would be a great sin. In just a few days they were out of the Wonder's range. Lu Yi had used the power of the origin to seal the core in advance. This way, even if he left the Wonder with the core, the three parts of minuscule mountain would not immediately merge. He planned to wait until he returned to the 9 states before removing this seal. After leaving the Wonder, Lu Yi focused his mind and used the Rainbow Divine Lotus to search for the passage to the Soul Race's ancestral land. Using the Soul Race's ancestral land as a transit point to return to the Jade Conch was his only way. Otherwise, he did not know how long it would take to fly like this. Moreover, Lu Yi did not know where the Jade Conch was. After searching for a while, he found nothing. This meant that there was no passage to the Soul Race's ancestral land nearby. Lu Yi was not in a hurry. He flew forward casually, feeling around from time to time. There were many passages connecting the Soul Race's ancestral land to the outside world. As long as he flew far enough, he would definitely be able to sense the location of a passage. If that did not work, he could still return to the 10,000 Elephant Sea the same way he came. Traveling like this was extremely boring. Lu Yi had to be careful at all times, and he couldn't split his attention to cultivate. Fortunately, half a month later, when he immersed his mind once more, he finally sensed a trace of a faint connection through the 7-colored Divine Lotus. As expected, there was no doubt a passage to the Soul Race's ancestral land in that direction. Lu Yi immediately steered the core in a different direction and flew in that direction. As time passed, the connection became vaguely clearer. However, the distance was still very far. Several days later, Lu Yi, who was sitting cross-legged on the core, suddenly looked into the distance. Under the enhancement of the insight spirit pattern, the scene that was imprinted in his eyes made him frown involuntarily. There was a realm in the void ahead. However, at this moment, this realm was being invaded by an external enemy. The invading force was a huge insect hive. This insect hive was floating not far outside the realm. Although the insect hive was much smaller in size, the situation in the void battlefield was extremely intense. Lu Yi could clearly see that outside the realm, countless cultivators had formed a defensive line to resist the invading insect race. Around the battlefield, who knew how many pieces of corpses were floating? This was undoubtedly a realm war as well as an invasion. Back then, the four-way galaxy had encountered such an invasion. If Lu Yi had not lured Dancer here, it would probably have been invaded by the insect and blood races. In the starry sky, the number of insect hives drifting around in search of invading targets was not particularly large, but it was not small either. Each of these huge insect hives was equivalent to a drifting realm. Before discovering an invading target, the insect race would rest and recuperate. Once they discovered an invading target, they would come out in full force. Generally speaking, in a realm occupied by such an insect hive, all living creatures would be wiped out. The insect race would stay in the realm for some time until all the resources in the realm were extracted before leaving. At this time, the invaded realm would be in tatters, without the slightest bit of life. Many dead stars in the starry sky came about in this way. Lu Yi did not know which star system this was, nor did he know which realm was invaded, but since he had encountered it, he did not intend to stand by and do nothing. It was fine if he did not have the ability to intervene, but the key was that he had the ability to intervene and kill the insect race. There was no mistake. He immediately changed direction and drove the core straight towards the huge insect hive. At first, the two sides fighting in the void did not notice anything. After all, the battle was so intense that they could not afford to be distracted. But as Lu Yi continued to approach, his whereabouts were eventually exposed. The first to discover him was a Sunshine Insect race member. Outside the chaotic battlefield in the void, there was another battlefield. That was where Nicho was fighting. Two Nicho from the insect race were fighting against a single human. Their strength seemed to be on par with each other. 1 against 2, the human Nicho was undoubtedly in a bad situation. But even so, it would not be so easy for Sunshine Insect race member to kill him. Just as Lu Yi was approaching the battlefield with the core, one of the two Sunshine Insect race members suddenly separated. A pair of wings on his back flapped, and flew straight towards Lu Yi. Before he even got close, a powerful spiritual energy bombarded him. Lu Yi, who was sitting cross-legged on the core, did not even make a sound. He tilted his head and fell down. Seeing this, Sunshine Insect race member could not help but coldly snort, "You overestimate yourself." Although he didn't place Lu Yi in his eyes, the core beneath Lu Ye's body surprised him. With his experience, he could tell at a glance that this core was no ordinary object. As for what it was, he had no way of knowing. But no matter what it was always right to take it first. Thinking so, he went up to the core and reached out to grab it. Lu Yi, who had already fallen on the core, suddenly opened his eyes and looked at him calmly. There was no trace of injury. Sunshine Insect race member could not help but be startled. Before he could react, a devouring force swept out and enveloped him. Then his vision blurred, and the noisy battle disappeared without a trace. He did not know why he had come to another world. When he turned his head to look around, he saw 4 figures surrounding him. When he sensed them, he was greatly surprised. These 4 people were all late-stage Moon Jade Realm cultivators. End of chapter. Chapter 1808. Hikari's sudden disappearance shocked the other Zerg who was fighting with his enemy. While he was distracted, the human Hikari managed to turn the tables around. Hikari was fighting 1 against 2 just now and was in a bad situation. Now that he had turned the tables, he immediately counterattacked and entangled his enemies. Although he didn't know Lu Ye's background, nor did he know why Rizhao had mysteriously disappeared, but Lu Yi was indeed a human and had helped him, which made him very grateful. Hikari was unable to get away in a one-on-one fight and was very anxious. Seeing the core that looked like a fake mountain heading straight for the Zerg's nest, Hikari roared angrily, "Stop him!" The Zerg's nest was the foundation of this Zerg tribe. Naturally, it could not be lost. Many Zerg cultivators received the order and activated their power to attack Lu Yi. In an instant, spiritual power and magic power became chaotic. No one could underestimate such a concentrated attack. Lu Yi, on the other hand, remained seated at the core, not moving at all, completely ignoring the attacks coming from all directions. With a thought, a mysterious power spread out from his inner world and turned into an invisible barrier that enveloped the surrounding space. This mysterious power was the power of the inner world itself and not Lu Ye's magic power. After refining the core's origin, Lu Yi realized this. Not only could he drive the core like a planetary boat, but he could also mobilize the power of the inner world for his own use. This was a very strange experience that Lu Yi had never experienced before. If he did not have such confidence, he would not have dared to barge into the battlefield where Hikari was fighting for supremacy. The Zerg cultivators' attacks were all blocked by the invisible barrier and could not hurt Lu Yi at all. Some of the Zerg cultivators in front could not dodge in time and were directly smashed to pieces by the core. The distance between the Zerg and the Zerg's nest was quickly shortened. The huge Zerg's nest that was originally in front of them began to move. Clearly, the Zerg inside had sensed that the situation was not right and wanted to control the nest to avoid it. However, it was not easy to move such a huge Zerg nest. The Zerg could not control the inner world as easily as Lu Yi. Under the horrified gazes of countless Zerg cultivators, the core that was more than 100 feet long crashed into the huge Zerg's nest. The unparalleled speed, coupled with the impact of the bounded domain, caused a huge crater to appear before the eyes of the insect clan cultivators at the point of impact. With a crushing force, a hole was smashed through the heart of the huge hive. Who knew how many insects had died inside at that moment? That was not the end of it. Almost as soon as the inner world flew out of the hive, the terrifying impact completely exploded inside the hive. The insect nest itself wasn't too sturdy, and it couldn't withstand such an impact. The insect nest, which already had a hole in it, was torn apart by the force of the impact. Many insectoid cultivators were enraged. The humans, on the other hand, were suddenly energized. Rizhao, the only human, roared, "Kill!" In this war, the biggest headache for the humans was not the disparity in military strength, nor was it the disparity in the number of sunshine. It was the insectoids' continuous combat ability. Once the insectoids were heavily injured, they would quickly return to their hives to recuperate. It would not take long for them to reappear on the battlefield, brimming with energy. On the other hand, the humans did not have such convenience. As the insectoids grew stronger, the humans became more and more strained. If there were no accidents, this war was destined to end with the humans suffering a crushing defeat. Once that happened, their bounded domain would be destroyed, and all the humans within would be slaughtered to the last man. No one would have thought that in such a precarious situation, a divine soldier would descend from the heavens, riding an unknown treasure, and smash the Zerg's hive into pieces. This would undoubtedly greatly reduce the pressure on the humans in the subsequent battles. Furthermore, that uninvited guest had used some mysterious method to eliminate one of the enemy's members, Rizhao. Countless humans looked in Lu Ye's direction gratefully, but he was nowhere to be seen. Lu Yi was already hundreds of thousands of kilometers away, riding on the core. At this moment, the core came to a stop under his control. His body swayed and he entered the inner world. A great battle was breaking out. The Xiang sisters Yang Ling and Hu Dequan, the 4 late-stage Yu Yao, had joined forces to fight fiercely against Rizhao of the insectoid clan, who had been swallowed into the inner world. Under normal circumstances, the 4 late-stage Yu Yao would not be a match for Rizhao, even if they joined forces. Rizhao's ability was not something the Yu Yao could compare to. The Yu Yao could not break through the suppression of the divine soul alone. However, the inner world was barely able to maintain a balance on the battlefield. The Xiang sisters activated the Blood Sea technique with all their might, trapping Rizhao of the insectoid clan within. Yang Ling and Hu Dequan hid within, waiting for an opportunity to strike. From time to time they would launch sneak attacks, and if they missed they would immediately flee. In the midst of the fierce battle, Yang Ling's divine consciousness surged, and he sent a voice transmission to his companions. "What's going on? Why did Rizhao of the insectoid clan suddenly appear? Where did he come from? Where is Brother Lu? Explain." He had too many questions. The Battle of the Black Abyss had ended, the sacred blood mountain had been eradicated, and even the blood ancestors' treasured blood had been suppressed. He and Hu Dequan only needed to wait patiently. One day the 3 divisions of Mount Fangsuan would reunite, and he would be able to see his beloved again. Who would have thought that just now he would inexplicably appear here, along with the sisters and Hu Dequan? And then Rizhao of the insectoid clan appeared in front of him. And so, a muddle-headed battle broke out just like that. He was muddle-headed, but Rizhao of the insectoid clan was even more muddle-headed. From the perspective of the insectoids, the blood race was their natural ally. If they met in the starry sky, even if they did not drink and chat merrily, they would at least show signs of closeness. This was a deep friendship that had been forged through countless battles between the 2 races since ancient times. So, he simply could not understand why there was a blood race ambushing him here. He tried to communicate with the other party, but he did not get any response at all. In his frustration he could only go all out and prepare to kill the other party first. However, just as he was about to do so, a scene that shocked him appeared. An inexplicable force descended from the unseen world, making him feel as if he was carrying a mountain. If he was not strong enough he would have knelt on the ground, unable to move. It could be said that at this moment he could not even unleash 60% of his peak strength. He immediately cried out in shock, "The power of heaven and earth!" Someone was controlling this world's power of heaven and earth to suppress him. This was simply inconceivable. If one wanted to control a world's power of heaven and earth, they had to become the master of that world and refine its source. It was not that there were no such cultivators in the starry sky, but they were extremely rare, and every one of them was a true realm master. He really could not understand why he was so unlucky to run into one. Even though he could only unleash 60% of his peak strength and was trapped in the Blood Sea, he was still able to fight evenly with Xiang Yin and the others, occasionally even gaining the upper hand. What he relied on was nothing more than his spiritual energy. His soul attacks were invisible and traceless, making it impossible for Xiang Yin and the others to guard against them. If this continued, once he found a flaw in their defenses, it was very likely they would be defeated one by one. Just as the four late-stage Yu Yao were in a terrible fix, Lu Ye's aura suddenly appeared. The four were overjoyed. In the next instant, the sound of a fierce battle came from the Blood Sea, accompanied by a muffled groan. The entire Blood Sea seemed to be boiling, and the powerful impact almost overwhelmed the Xiang sisters. At this time Hikari, who was shrouded in the Blood Sea, was bewildered. He had also sensed Lu Ye's arrival and immediately recognized that this was the human Yu Yao who had suddenly barged into the battlefield, the one he wanted to get rid of. Initially, when he saw that the other party was only at the middle stage of the Yu Yao realm, he didn't think much of him. However, after that brief exchange of blows he realized one thing: this human Yu Yao was ridiculously strong. So far, none of the Yu Yao he had met were stronger than him. Fortunately, his opponent was only a Yu Yao. If he was also a Hikari, he was afraid that he would be in deep trouble. Was he the one controlling this world's power of heaven and earth? Thoughts flashed through Hikari's mind. For a moment he couldn't figure out what was going on. But no matter what, this Yu Yao was the most suspicious. Thus, Hikari immediately pounced towards Lu Ye's location, intending to finish him off first. Almost at the same time, Lu Yi activated his Blood Sea technique, merging his own Blood Sea with Xiang Yin's Blood Sea. In an instant, the Blood Sea became even denser. Sensing Hikari's clear killing intent, Lu Yi wielded his mountain blade and dashed away. Hikari's movement technique was unpredictable to begin with. Now that he was in the Blood Sea and had the Void Spirit runes to form, he was even more unpredictable. Hikari was instantly dumbfounded. Even though his cultivation was one realm higher than Lu Ye's, he still could not grasp Lu Ye's whereabouts. There was no pattern to Lu Ye's movements. Hikari often thought that he had grasped Lu Ye's position, but when he attacked, he missed. Lu Yi would take advantage of this opportunity to close in on him and slash down with his mountain blade, leaving a wound that was neither deep nor shallow. Not only that, Xiang Yin and the other three did not stop attacking. They followed the principle of hit and run, not giving their opponent any room or leeway to counterattack. Hikari the Zerg flew into a rage. He felt like a lone lion with a few sneaky hyenas poking him from time to time. Faced with such a situation, he didn't have a good solution. If he was at his peak, he could easily crush a few Yu Yao. Unfortunately, he was being suppressed by the power of heaven and earth. Suppressing his anger, he calmly waited for a good opportunity. It was impossible for the enemy's attacks to be flawless. As long as he could find a flaw, he would be able to win. In other words, he could make countless mistakes, but the enemy could only make one mistake. I have the advantage. Gradually, however, he felt that something was not right. His wounds were healing very slowly. There seemed to be an extremely strange power lingering around his wounds, hindering his recovery. Even with Hikari's physique, he could not avoid it. Sore throat. Feeling? Hit again? F***ck. How sad. I've been suffering since the beginning of August. End of chapter. Chapter 1809. What made Hikaru even more terrified was that there was an inexplicable power coming from the Blood Sea, causing his blood to flow out of his wounds. Even when he tried to use his magic to block it, he was unable to do so. The strange power of the Fang, coupled with the blood tracing technique, was a battle tactic that Lu Yi and Ma Shangxi had come up with together a few years ago. It was suitable for powerful enemies like the one before them. If they couldn't kill them in one blow, they could only wear them down slowly. The power of the Fang was the key. Without the power of the Fang, which could hinder the healing of wounds, the blood tracing technique wouldn't work. Although Ma Shangxi wasn't here, the Xiang sisters could still easily use the blood tracing technique. Hikaru's intense and sullen battle thus began. This was definitely the greatest torture he had ever encountered in his life. He clearly had the ability to kill the enemy in one blow, but he couldn't grasp the enemy's whereabouts. As time passed, Hikaru's body was in tatters. Lu Yi had inflicted countless wounds on him. It had to be said that Hikaru's physique was really strong, especially when his opponent was an insect. With Lu Ye's promotion to Yu Yao, the mountain blade that had also been upgraded to a magic weapon was sharp enough. Lu Yi had also enhanced it with the Divine Edge Spirit Mark. Even so, every slash of the blade couldn't cause any substantial damage to the enemy. At most, it would leave behind some superficial wounds. It was precisely these wounds that were neither painful nor itchy to Rizhao, but now they had become the heavy burden that crushed the enemy. After a full day of fighting, Hikaru's face had become extremely pale. His aura had also weakened greatly. He looked like an arrow at the end of its flight. He wasn't the only one like this. Other than Lu Yi, the other Yu Yao were also like this. First, this kind of battle consumed too much energy. These few Yu Yao had been tense all the time. Their magic power had been fully activated. To be able to hold on for so long was already a reflection of their strength. Second, each of them had endured more than one soul attack from Hikaru. That kind of attack was hard to resist, and it was also the thing that puzzled them the most. Under the repeated attacks, the four Yu Yao were a little dizzy and uneasy. Even their movements were much slower. Under Lu Ye's orders, the four of them had already retreated from the Blood Sea battlefield in advance to avoid being killed by the enemy. At this moment, Lu Yi was the only one left in the Sea of Blood, fighting the enemy alone. Victory was about to be decided. Lu Yi made another tentative attack. After leaving a new wound on Hikaru's body, Lu Ye's expression turned solemn. He reached out his hand and grabbed the air. A slender bone blade appeared in his left hand. The bone dagger came from an insectoid he had killed in the past. That guy should be a descendant of Green Prickly Beetle. He had used the Great Windmill secret technique on Lu Yi, but Lu Yi had perfectly broken it on the spot and killed him without knowing why. His two bone blades became Lu Ye's spoils of war. The bone blade was actually a part of the insect's body and had been tempered by the insect for countless years. It was extremely hard and sharp, and was not inferior to the best magical treasures. In terms of quality, it was probably only slightly worse than the current mountain plate blade. Leaping could only weaken one Zerg Sunshine, but it could not kill him. He couldn't use Draw Lu Yi. Ever since the battle in the Black Abyss, he had been refining the origin source and hadn't nurtured the Draw Spirit rune. At this stage, the most violent secret technique he could use was the Great Windmill. He had once used this secret technique to kill Hikari, who was affected by Dancer. History might repeat itself today. Lu Yi gently exhaled, and the boundless blood sea also rushed into his body at this moment. In the blink of an eye, the blood sea dissipated. On the surface of Lu Ye's body, blood and chi were steaming, and a faint red mist shrouded him. In a very short period of time, his blood and chi were pushed to the limit, and his magic power hummed in his body. Suddenly freed, Hikari didn't react, but soon looked weakly at Lu Yi, and his expression couldn't help but tremble. He also realized that Lu Yi was going to kill him. But soon he showed a look of surprise, because he suddenly saw a strange blood-red mark appear between Lu Ye's eyebrows. Flower of the body? Hikari opened his eyes wide, trying to make sure he didn't see wrong. As Hikari, his experience was naturally extraordinary. He had heard some secrets about cultivation, and one of them was this flower of the body. Legend has it that cultivators who reach the peak of the constellation realm will condense the flower of the body. But he had only heard of this kind of thing and had never seen it before, so he couldn't be sure if it was true or not. In his opinion, there were many outstanding Constellation Realm cultivators in his clan, and those Constellation Realm cultivators had reached the point of no further progress, but none of them had condensed the flower of the body. He always thought this was a rumor, but who would have thought that he would see it with his own eyes one day? He suddenly understood why the strength of this human in front of him was so strong. It was because he really reached the peak of the Constellation Realm, achieving a feat that countless creatures could only dream of. A strong sense of crisis arose in his heart, and Hikari smelled the breath of death. In the face of such a crisis, he roared and used all his power to activate his soul secret technique. This was the killing move he had been preparing for a long time, and he hadn't used it until now, just for this moment to turn the tables. At the same time, Lu Yi released his spiritual energy, and his right eye suddenly turned blood red. Amidst the blood-red light, countless complex and tiny runes appeared in his eye, making it look both strange and terrifying. The blood eye had appeared. This was the second time Lu Yi had used the blood eye spirit rune since he obtained it. The first time was a test, and it allowed him to slightly understand the mysteries of the blood eye spirit rune. It was of the same origin as the blood eye spirit rune he saw in the wonder that day. When this blood eye spirit rune was activated, it had an obvious illusory effect, mysterious and powerful. The Hikari in front of him was not the same person who was affected by Dancer's power and had his movements restricted. He was also not Blazing Heaven, who was besieged by so many Yu Yao and wanted to die. Even if Lu Yi was using the power of his inner world to suppress him, even if he looked incomparably weak, Lu Yi didn't dare to be careless when facing such an enemy. So, he used all his abilities, even pushing his strength to the limit. The appearance of the flower of the body was the most obvious sign, which meant that Lu Ye's blood qi had been pushed to the limit. On the other side, Hikari subconsciously looked into the blood-red eye. In an instant he was in a trance. It was as if he saw an indomitable giant, high above, looking down at him with one eye. It was as if he saw a blood-red moon rising into the sky, bathing in the moonlight, and the whole world was dripping with blood. In the end he was still Hikari. Even if Lu Yi activated the blood eye spirit rune, it would only affect him for a moment. In the next instant, all the illusions in front of Hikari's eyes disappeared, but his expression changed drastically. This was because the killing move he had carefully prepared had been disturbed in that instant, showing signs of collapsing. This directly led to an extremely bad outcome. His spirit sea churned and the power of his spirit became chaotic. It was like a spell cultivator who was about to cast a large-scale spell and was interrupted at a critical moment. The turbulence in his magic power would inevitably cause a backlash. Hikari's current situation was similar. He opened his mouth and let out a miserable cry, his face contorted in pain. He instinctively raised his hands to cover his head. When Lu Yi saw this, he didn't hesitate at all. He rushed forward and slashed down with the mountain blade. His body rotated as the mountain blade slashed down and the bone blade rose. The first few slashes were still traceable, but after a few more slashes, there was only a violent storm of blade light that enveloped a large area. In the distance, Yang Ling and the others, who had already retreated from the battlefield, were dumbfounded. Even the Xiang sisters were no exception. Although Lu Yi had already displayed strength that exceeded his cultivation base in the battle with the Red Talisman Association, they really didn't expect that what they saw was not the whole story. This was probably Lu Ye's true strength. That terrifying killing intent and violent attack were not things that Yu Yao could withstand. Yang Ling considered himself to be one of the strongest Yu Yao. He secretly imagined that if he were to face such an attack, he wouldn't be able to last more than 2 breaths. The blade light slowly receded. Lu Yi stood on the spot, holding the blade with both hands. His blood and qi were boiling to the extreme, and the blood mist on his body was rising. With him as the center, within a radius of 100 miles, there were numerous crisscrossing ravines that were extremely shocking. Hikari the insect was nowhere to be seen. Only pieces of his corpse remained on the ground, evidence that he had once been alive. Although they had expected this, Yang Ling and the others still felt like they were in a dream when they saw this scene. Yu Yao had killed Hikari. This was such a ridiculous thing, and it was happening right under their noses. Yang Ling felt that he would never forget this scene for the rest of his life. Cracking sounds continued to ring out. Lu Yi staggered slightly. He didn't know how much of his flesh had been broken in an instant. He put away the Pan Mountain Saber and Bone Saber, sat down cross-legged, took out a spirit pill and swallowed it. He silently recovered, his expression emotionless. Hikari the insect was not the first to die at his hands. Moreover, Hikari the insect was unable to unleash his full strength in this battle, so there was nothing to be happy about. If there was a day when he could kill Hikari with his own strength, then it would be worth celebrating. That day would come eventually, and it wouldn't be too late. A few days later, Lu Yi recovered. After exhorting Yang Ling and the others who were still healing, he leaped out of the inner world. Then he took out his star boat and rushed back the way he came. He wanted to see the situation on the other side of the battlefield. Although he had taken away Hikari and destroyed the insect's nest, which should greatly relieve the pressure on the human cultivators in that realm, there were still some things that he had to see with his own eyes. Before Lu Yi could reach the original battlefield, a group of cultivators flew over. They were in a hurry, and their divine consciousness spread out as if they were searching for something. End of chapter. Chapter 1810. The cultivators coming toward him were not in good condition. They looked like they had been through a great battle and were in a sorry state. After seeing Lu Yi, the leader, Yu Yao, immediately came up and cupped his fists from afar. Lin Qi of Life Origin greets fellow Taoist. Lin Qi had seen Lu Yi from afar. After all, when Lu Yi drove the core into the scorching battlefield a few days ago, he sat cross-legged on the core and did not hide his figure. So many cultivators had seen him from afar. For the Life Yuan realm, one of the two insect races Rizhao was taken away, and the insect race's nest was broken. This was undoubtedly a great help. If not for this, the Life Yuan realm would have been in a terrible situation. Therefore, even if he didn't know Lu Ye's identity, he still had a grateful look on his face at this moment. This was a genuine life-saving grace. The cultivators behind him also saluted in unison. Lu Yi returned the greeting. You Luo Lu Yi. He had wanted to investigate the situation of the battle over there, but after seeing Lin Qi and the others, he understood that there was no need to investigate anything. If the battle had not ended, these people would not have come over. From their posture, it was obvious that they were looking for him. The Life Origin realm should have one. Although he already had a guess, Lu Yi still asked. As expected, Lin Qi told him that the insectoids had retreated. The insectoids' biggest reliance was the two insectoids, Rizhao and the nest. However, one of them had mysteriously disappeared, and the nest had been smashed into pieces. They had lost their advantage. Many cultivators of the Life Origin realm fought back and killed countless insectoids. The remaining insectoid, Rizhao, saw that the situation was not good and immediately retreated. He was probably afraid of Lu Yi because his companion's disappearance was too strange. He did not dare to stay outside the Life Origin realm until he knew the whereabouts of his companion and whether he was alive or dead. Although the Life Origin realm had won this battle and saved the realm, they had suffered a great loss. Rizhao was seriously injured and was now recuperating in the realm. I came to investigate under the orders of Uncle Master Qin Jiang. Fellow Taoist Lu, that insectoid Rizhao. Lin Qi looked at Lu Yi. The Qin Jiang he mentioned was undoubtedly Rizhao of the Life Origin realm. Lu Yi replied, Don't worry, my friend. That insectoid Rizhao is already dead. Lin Ran and the other human cultivators were overjoyed. They hurriedly asked, May I ask which senior helped us? It wasn't that he looked down on Lu Yi, but it was clear that Lu Yi was only a Midyueyao realm cultivator. The gap between Lu Yi and Ri was too big. It was impossible for Lu Yi to have such means. Lu Yi also realized this problem, so after pondering for a moment he replied, Your master personally killed him. Since he couldn't say that he was the one who killed him, he might as well make up a story. Lin Qi had an expression of understanding. She looked behind Lu Yi and asked, May I ask if your master is now? Lu Yi opened his mouth and said, Master was injured in a battle with the enemy and is currently recuperating. He ordered me to check on the progress of your battle. Lin Ran's expression tightened as she asked with concern, Are your injuries serious? It's not that serious. If you don't mind, can you ask your master to go to the Life Origin realm to heal? In addition, Martial Uncle Qin Jiang would also like to express his gratitude in person. Lu Yi shook his head and said, There's no need. My master's temperament is more of a loner. He's not used to interacting with others. Since the battle in your realm is over, we won't stay here any longer. Take care, fellow Taoist. Lu Yi cupped his fists and turned to leave. Lin Qi was anxious. Fellow Taoist, please wait. We can't repay such a great favor. No matter what, please let us do something. Otherwise, we won't be able to explain to Uncle Master Qin Jiang when we return. Lu Yi stopped and turned to look at him. Just as he was about to refuse, he suddenly thought of something and said, If that's the case, then please collect some fire attribute resources and bring them over. My honored master has great use for them. He had used up all the fire-type resources on him, and even the fuel reserves of his talent tree had been used up. He had planned to replenish them in the future, but now that he had the chance, he could get some for his use. Moreover, although this battle had not consumed much of his energy, what he had consumed was the foundation of his inner world. The power to seal Hikaru came from the foundation of his inner world. This was also the reason why Lu Yi had used the Great Pinwheel Secret technique at the last moment. Sealing Hikaru had consumed a lot of the foundation of his inner world. The sooner he got rid of his opponent, the sooner this consumption would end. Otherwise, Lu Yi could have slowly killed Hikaru without taking the risk. It was very troublesome to recover the foundation of a realm. Lu Yi was only asking the Life Origin realm for fire-type resources. Compared to the consumption of the realm's foundation, it was nothing. Lin Qi's eyes lit up and he quickly nodded. Fellow Taoist, please wait a moment. With that said, he took out a sound talisman and sent out a message. Soon he looked at Lu Yi. The inner world will do its best to collect fire-type resources. They will be delivered in half a day. While waiting, Lin Qi and Lu Yi chatted. Lin Qi repeatedly mentioned that he wanted to pay a visit to his non-existent master and thank him in person, but Lu Yi fooled him. Lu Yi also thought of a problem. Although we won this battle, if the insectoids come back, how will you deal with them? Hikaru had not died and had escaped. It was hard to guarantee that he would not find other insectoid nests and lead them to the life origin realm. This might take a long time, but it was very likely that the day would come. Lin Qi could not help but sigh. But there is no good way to deal with it. We can only work hard and cultivate. Hopefully, when that day comes, our realm will have enough strength to protect itself. Lu Yi did not speak. He had just happened to be there and helped the life origin realm, saving them from disaster. However, they would not be so lucky next time. They would have to work hard. The insectoid and blood races were the most notorious races in the universe. Relatively speaking, the insectoid race was more dangerous than the blood race. This was related to the way the two races lived. The blood race had several realms, which were all formed by the remains of the blood ancestor after his death. They were basically fixed. Even if the blood race went on expeditions, they would only kidnap living beings and rear them to ensure the supply of blood. However, the insectoids were different. This race did not have a fixed place to cultivate. The insectoids usually used their nests as their foundation and wandered around the universe. If they encountered a target that they could invade along the way, they would start a war. However, there were exceptions to everything. Sometimes there were also blood race members in the nest. The two races often cooperated. Half a day later, a cultivator rushed over from the life origin realm and brought a few storage rings for Lin Qi. Lin Qi checked them and handed them to Lu Yi. Fellow Taoist, can't I ask your master to go to the life origin realm to heal? Lin Qi wanted to make one last effort. Lu Yi shook his head. Thank you for your kindness, fellow Taoist. We have no fixed residence and wander around. As humans, we should help our friends when they are in trouble. As for going to your realm to heal, there's no need. Master is already meditating, so it's not good to disturb him. Lin Qi sighed. Your master is righteous. I will remember this in my heart. If we meet again in the future, I will definitely repay him. See you later. Lu Yi cupped his fists, picked up the rings and left. Lin Qi and the others watched. A moment later, Lu Yi returned to the core and sat cross-legged on it. With a thought, he drove the core and continued on his way. While traveling, he refined the fire-type resources he had obtained from the life origin realm. In a few days, he had completely refined them. After checking the talent tree, Lu Yi felt a little relieved. There was no fuel for the talent tree, which made him feel more or less uncertain. Now he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. However, the fuel was not enough at the moment. He had not completely refined the blood ancestor's precious blood mixed in the origin. He could only think of a way in the future. At the very least, he had to settle down the core first. Another storage ring appeared in his hand. This was left behind by the insectoid Rizhao after his death. Rizhao's inheritance. Lu Yi was full of anticipation as he focused on cracking the restriction lock on the storage ring. Half a day later, when the restriction lock on the ring was broken, Lu Yi's face darkened after checking it. This was because the inheritance in the ring was worlds apart from what he had expected. There was almost nothing good in it. There were not even many spirit jades and spirit crystals. Thinking about it carefully, this was not strange. The insectoid's way of survival was destined to not leave too many resources on their bodies. The resources they obtained were basically invested in the insectoid hive. The insectoid hive could turn all the resources obtained by the insectoids into nutrients. The insectoid's cultivation, healing, and growth were all carried out in the insectoid hive. This was somewhat similar to the fuel stored in his talent tree, except that the insectoid hive stored the resources obtained by the insectoids as nutrients. Now, the nutrients accumulated by countless resources had disappeared with the destruction of the insectoid hive. Lu Yi was helpless. Moving forward, the core finally arrived at the designated location. In the void, Lu Yi's divine sense surged. With the rainbow god Lotus in his divine sea, he connected to the soul race's ancestral land. As time passed, the connection grew stronger. Until a certain moment, a door suddenly opened in the void in front of him. Lu Yi drove the core and rushed in through the door. The world spun. When he came back to his senses, the familiar scenery was imprinted in his eyes. He had arrived at the soul race's ancestral land. At the same time, on the immortal spirit peak of Mount Fangtsuan in the east, Su Yuqing, who was cultivating with her eyes closed, suddenly opened her eyes with a puzzled look. Because at that moment she suddenly felt something strange. This was something she had never felt before. Not only her, but Wu Qima, who was sitting on the ethereal peak and watching the rolling clouds, also looked puzzled at the same time. On the Cloud Sea peak, Qin Xianhai stood with his hands behind his back. He suddenly looked up at the sky and raised his eyebrows. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly rushed into the sky. Sensing Qin Xianhai's movement, Su Yuqing and Wu Qima's figures flickered as they rushed towards the sky. The three great sunshine already had a guess. As to whether this guess was true or not, they still had to verify it with their own eyes. Even as strong as the three of them, they looked excited and expectant. Because if their guess was true, it would be a joyous occasion that the hominid race had been waiting for countless years. Illness really came like a landslide. Yesterday it was just a sore throat, but in the afternoon it started with a fever. The fever lasted through the night, and when I woke up in the morning both my eye sockets hurt. My entire body was sore and weak. I have to go to the hospital. Then after today's update, please forgive me. End of chapter. Chapter 1811. On the way out, the three Rihos of Mount Fangtsuan in the east met. They looked at each other and saw what each other was thinking. After a short while, the three of them flew out of Mount Fangtsuan and into space. Turning around, Wu Qima's pupils constricted. "It stopped," he exclaimed. Su Yuqing frowned. Qin Xianhai's expression was grave. The three of them had just noticed that something was wrong with Mount Fangtsuan. They had assumed that something had happened to the core, which was why they were filled with anticipation. However, when they came out, they realized that this wasn't the case. What does this mean? Wu Qima couldn't figure it out. What he was seeing was different from what he had expected. Ever since the blood ancestor had broken Mount Fangtsuan, the three divisions had been separated, and the core had been lost. Since then, the three divisions of Mount Fangtsuan had been using the core's location as a reference. This was why the Rihos of Mount Fangtsuan had been able to figure out where the core was hidden. All these years they had been working hard to find the core. They had even sent Yu Yao, who had been carefully nurtured by them, to that wonder. In the Rihos' minds, if someone could bring the core out of that wonder, then the three divisions of Mount Fangtsuan would immediately start moving toward the core's location and merge back together. After so many years, they had all thought that Mount Fangtsuan had suddenly started to move. However, what they were seeing now didn't seem to be the case. If someone had really brought the core out of the wonder, then Mount Fangtsuan wouldn't have stopped moving. Instead, it would have turned around and flown toward the core. This was what Wu Qima couldn't understand. Then, a hair-raising thought appeared in his mind. The core can't have been destroyed, right? If Mount Fangtsuan wanted to stop, it could be controlled. Previously, Mount Fangtsuan had stopped on the 10,000 manifestations sea for 2 months. However, this time couldn't have been too long. Otherwise, it would have affected Mount Fangtsuan's trajectory. Now, none of the three Rihos had controlled Mount Fangtsuan to stop. The fact that Mount Fangtsuan had suddenly stopped made one's imagination run wild. One possibility was that the core had been destroyed, which was why Mount Fangtsuan had stopped moving in the east. Qin Xianhai shook his head. Although Mount Fangtsuan has been split, if the core was destroyed, the three divisions would definitely be shaken. Now that the east is peaceful, the core should be fine. Su Yuqing nodded, agreeing with Qin Xianhai's point of view. Then what's going on? Wu Qima scratched his head. He had never encountered such a strange thing in his life. Su Yuqing's eyes flashed as she said, "There's another possibility." Qin Xianhai turned to look at her. According to our analysis, the reason why the three Fangtsuan mountains are unable to fuse with the core is because there is a type of isolating power in that wonder that prevents the fusion of the two. If that isolating power suddenly becomes much stronger and completely cuts off the connection between the core and the headquarters, this was because the headquarters was based on the location of the core. Now that the core was completely isolated, without this base, the headquarters Fangtsuan mountain stopped moving. The spectacle has changed. Qin Xianhai's frown deepened. If that was the case, it wouldn't be a good thing for the Mini-Men tribe. After all, the core was inside the wonder. Who knew if this change would be good or bad for the core? That Lu Ye has been there for more than 3 years, right? Wu Qima suddenly looked at Su Yuqing. Do you think this change has anything to do with him? No one knew the answer to this question because the Mini-Men tribe had no way of contacting Lu Ye. Back then, Jianghu had left after sending Lu Ye to the vicinity of the Wonder. Because he wasn't sure if Lu Ye had gained anything from this trip, nor was he sure how long he would stay in the Wonder, Jianghu couldn't possibly wait for him forever. Su Yuqing was silent for a moment before suddenly turning to Chen Xianhai. "Senior brother Chen, I want to go and take a look." She was still a bit worried. In truth, she regretted telling Lu Ye about the core. She hadn't expected Lu Ye to immediately go and look for it. Chen Xianhai could roughly understand Su Yuqing's feelings and didn't try to dissuade her. Instead he said, "Junior sister, if you really want to go, there's no need to rush. No one knows the reason behind this change and no one can guess what will happen in the future. There's no harm in waiting a few more days and observing the situation. Perhaps you'll discover something new. If there are no changes, it won't be too late to go then." His words made sense. Su Yuqing suppressed the uneasiness in her heart and slowly nodded. Chen Xianhai raised his hand and said, "Let's go back first. Since there are changes here, the other two tribes should also have changes. Let's discuss it with those old fellows first." The three Sunshine tribes returned to the domain. Another half a day passed. In an illusory palace, illusory figures appeared one after another. They were all the spiritual projections of the Sunshine tribe experts of Mount Fangsuan. Although the three tribes were divided, they were still incomparably close. If they paid a price, they could even allow the tribes to communicate freely. It was naturally not difficult to project one's spiritual consciousness to one place to discuss important matters of the tribe. Compared to meeting with one's spiritual consciousness in one place, the price to pay was much lower. Just as Chen Xianhai had predicted, not only did Mount Fangsuan in the east stop moving for a moment, the same thing also happened in the south and west. However, no one knew the specific reason. In the end, they could only conclude that the core was completely isolated, which was why there were changes in the three tribes of Mount Fangsuan. While the three Sunshine tribes were gathered for a meeting, in the ancestral land of the soul race, Lu Yi drove the core to a five-colored lotus land. From afar he saw many figures moving about on the lotus land, many of whom looked familiar. These figures were the Immortal Essence guards of Immortal Essence City. Lu Yi also saw a big white tiger lying down and sleeping somewhere on the lotus land. Several figures were gathered around it with sincere and solemn expressions. It was unknown what kind of secret technique they were cultivating. Soul power that seemed to resonate with each other surged out from Da Hu and the other figures. The big tiger, who was sleeping soundly, seemed to have sensed something. It suddenly opened its amber tiger eyes and looked in Lu Ye's direction. Then it hurriedly got up and pounced happily at Lu Yi. It jumped high and turned into the size of a cat in midair. Lu Yi smiled and grabbed it in his hand. After rubbing it for a while, the amber tiger closed its eyes and let out a satisfied purr. After playing with it for a while, Lu Yi asked, "Where's Yi?" As soon as he asked, he saw a door appear somewhere on the lotus land. Yi's little head poked out from it, obviously sensing something. "Lu Yi!" Yi cried out in surprise. Just like the amber tiger, she pounced on Lu Yi and bumped into him. She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her head in his chest. Lu Yi held on to Hu Po with one hand and her waist with the other. They spun a few rounds before slowly coming to a stop. Yi didn't want to let go at all. Until Li Shang's voice sounded, "Fellow Taoist Lu." Lu Yi smiled and replied, "Fellow Taoist Li Shang, long time no see." A moment later, in Yi's residence, Lu Yi looked around with his hands behind his back. The lotus land was a very strange place. From the outside it looked like a huge blooming lotus. This was also the habitat of the soul race. The lotus lands in the soul race's ancestral land were divided into different grades depending on the color. The Sunshine Realm cultivators lived in 7-colored lotus lands, while the Yu Yao lived in 5-colored ones. Li Shang was only a star mansion back then, but she was qualified to live in a 5-colored lotus land because she had done a great deed for the soul race and brought back a sacred beast. There was no place to live on the surface of the lotus land, but because the soul race didn't have a physical body, they only needed to create the environment they needed inside the lotus land. Yi's current residence was undoubtedly created by him. The furnishings inside were no different from the Jade Blood Sect's Green Bamboo Peaks bamboo tower. Yi sat on the side, hugging Hu Po, who was the size of a cat. She tilted her head and looked at him, swinging her legs. Her eyes were filled with happiness. Lu Yi walked to her side and sat down. He patted her head and asked, "Is cultivation tiring?" Yi shook her head. "It's not tiring. I have Hu Po to accompany me." Lu Yi glanced at Hu Po. "It only knows how to sleep. What can it accompany you for?" Hooper immediately howled, indicating that it was cultivating by sleeping. Besides, it was much stronger than before. Alright, I know you've become stronger. Lu Yi tapped Hoopo's head. It had to be said that Hooper and Yi had grown tremendously over the past few years in the soul race. Lu Yi could sense that the spiritual beast and spiritual beast were not far from Yu Yao. This was undoubtedly related to the unique cultivation environment in the soul race's ancestral land. In this kind of place, the soul race had a unique advantage in cultivation. Even if they didn't work hard, their cultivation would still slowly increase. I saw several soul race cultivators surrounding Hoopa just now. What were they doing? Lu Yi asked. Yi immediately explained, Hoopa has taken in a few new servants. The soul race cultivators you saw were all carefully selected by the soul race. They have the most outstanding aptitudes. They have formed a symbiotic relationship with Hoopa, so they can cultivate and grow together just like me. Lu Yi finally understood. When he recalled the resonance he felt from the soul race cultivators and Hoopa, he knew that Yi was right. Did Hoopa do this willingly or did the soul race request it? Lu Yi asked. Yi said, the clan leader personally said it. He didn't request anything. Hoopa agreed because the more servants it takes in, the faster its strength grows. Correspondingly, my strength will also grow along with it. Lu Yi nodded. Yi could see his worry. She smiled and said, don't worry. The soul race values Hoopa very much. They won't force him to do anything he doesn't like. That's good. However, there's one thing. If you're unhappy here, tell me at any time. I'll take you away, Lu Yi said seriously. When Yi wanted to follow Li Shang to the soul race's ancestral land to cultivate, Lu Yi was actually a little reluctant to let her go. However, the child had grown up. It wasn't a bad thing to have her own opinions. Most importantly, Lu Yi knew that he didn't have much time to accompany Yi. Today was still the first day. Yesterday I was in a daze. I ate some porridge at night. Today I don't have any strength at all. I'm sitting here writing, sweating all over. I still have to go to the hospital for an 4 drip. This time the illness came with great momentum. I haven't felt this bad in many years. In the past, when I got sick, it was always a gradual process. This time it was different. End of chapter. Chapter 1812. After staying on Li Shang's lotus continent for a few days, Lu Yi left. Yi and Hoopa watched him leave. They no longer felt as sad as they did last time. After all, their feelings were different. When they left last time, Yi felt that it would be a very, very long time before she could see Lu Yi again. Naturally, she was reluctant. But now that she knew that Lu Yi could come to the soul race's ancestral land, they would have many opportunities to meet in the future. Before they left, Yi gave Lu Yi thousands of soul jades. She had worked hard to condense these soul jades while she was cultivating. Lu Yi did not refuse and accepted them happily. Soul jades were hard to find in the outside world because it was difficult to find a suitable environment for soul jades. But they were easy to find in the soul race's ancestral land because there was pure soul energy everywhere. However, most soul race clansmen would not condense soul jades because they could refine soul energy to cultivate if they needed it. It was a waste of time to do so. Yi had prepared these soul jades especially for Lu Yi. Perhaps Li Shang had contributed some of them as well. In front of the 7-colored lotus continent where the starry pond was, Lu Yi had just arrived when he saw Elder Su Yuan's figure in the distance. In reality, when Lu Yi entered the soul race's ancestral land, Su Yuan, who was responsible for guarding the starry pond, had sensed him. But Lu Yi had gone to Li Shang's lotus continent first, so Su Yuan did not disturb him and waited here. Elder. Lu Yi leapt down from the core and saluted. Su Yuan nodded slightly and came forward. He looked at the core with interest, his expression uncertain. After a long time, Su Yuan asked, "Boy, is this a small world?" However, it seemed to be somewhat different from the small worlds that he knew. To call it a small world, it was undoubtedly too big. Generally speaking, small worlds could be carried around. For example, Lu Ye's Little Flower Realm could also be considered a small world. The treasure that Bansi had taken in Banksia was also a small world. But Su Yuan had never seen such a big small world. Its shape was also quite strange. Facing Su Yuan, Lu Yi did not hide and said directly, "It is not wrong to call it a small world, but it is different from ordinary small worlds. It is the core of Minuscule Mountain." Su Yuan turned to look at Lu Yi with shock. Minuscule Mountain? The minuscule mountain of the human race? That's right. Lu Yi nodded. Su Yuan became even more interested. He walked around the core and observed it. After a while he said, Back then the Blood Ancestor wanted to encroach on the Fangsuan Mountain. He led the blood race under his command and attacked. After a great battle, both sides suffered great losses. The Fangsuan Mountain was broken and divided into 3 parts. The core was lost and its whereabouts are unknown. Lu Yi explained, actually, the little humans have always known the location of the core. They have been trying to find it for many years, but due to some reasons they were unable to do so. I was asked by Rizhao of the little humans to explore it and I finally found something. You have a good relationship with the humanoid tribe? Su Yuan looked at him in surprise. If he could give such an important task as searching for the core to an outsider, their relationship couldn't be bad. Not bad. Lu Yi rubbed his nose. He couldn't possibly say that he and Rizhao of the dwarf clan were Dao companions. That would be too shocking. Su Yuan looked at him and chuckled. You have good social skills. Lu Yi could be considered half of the soul race, but now he had a close relationship with the little humans. Whether it was the soul race or the little humans, it wasn't easy to come into contact with them, especially the soul race. Ordinary people didn't even know where the soul race's ancestral land was, and it was impossible to find it. Lu Yi thought about it. He did seem to have a good relationship with several races. Not to mention the soul race and the little humans, there was also the mermaid race in the 10,000 Elephant Sea, which was the most reliable ally of the 3-world island. There was also the flower race in the 9 states. If I treat others with sincerity, others will naturally treat me with sincerity. Su Yuan nodded, agreeing with his words. Elder, have you seen the Blood Ancestor? Lu Yi asked. Su Yuan shook his head and said, I haven't. The Blood Ancestor was active a long time ago. I didn't exist back then. Moreover, you know the situation of the soul race. We usually don't have much interaction with the outside world. Why would the Blood Ancestor target the little humans? Su Yuan waved his hand and said, You're mistaken. The Blood Ancestor isn't targeting the little humans. She wants Minuscule Mountain. It's just that the little humans were born in Minuscule Mountain, so they were affected. I heard that in that era the insectoids were also enslaved by her. You should know the way the insectoids go about their conquest. Usually their insectoid nests will wander around, searching for a target domain that they can invade. However, things like insectoid nests are still rather fragile. If there are experts targeting them, they can be easily destroyed. But what if we place the insectoid nests within Mount Fangsuan? Lu Yi was enlightened. The insect race and Minuscule Mountain were an impeccable combination. Just think about it, the insect race was able to control a supreme treasure like Minuscule Mountain, drifting through the cosmos. If the blood progenitor had really taken Minuscule Mountain back then, the insect race would have been many times more dangerous than they were today. Moreover, Lu Yi finally understood why the insect race and the blood race had a good relationship. It turned out that they had both served the Blood Ancestor. It seemed that the blood race wasn't the only one involved in the war on Minuscule Mountain. The insect race was also involved. How did the Blood Ancestor die? Lu Yi asked again. According to Lu Ye's speculation, the Blood Ancestor's strength was probably not as simple as Rizhao's. How could such a powerful existence be defeated by someone else? Moreover, he was dismembered. Su Yuan shook his head. This old man doesn't know how the Blood Ancestor died, but kid, this world is not as simple as you think it is. There are some things that can only be discovered when you have enough strength. For cultivators, being weak is the greatest sin. After chatting with Su Yuan for a while, Lu Yi drove the core to the Starry Sky Pond. Elder, can I take the core through the passage? Lu Yi asked. He had always been a loner. Although the core wasn't very big, it was still more than 100 feet long. Lu Yi wasn't sure if he could take the core through the passage and return to the Jade Snail Galaxy. If he couldn't, then he would be in big trouble. At that time, he could only choose to leave the core in the soul race's ancestral land and find a way to inform the humanoid race so that they could take the core away. It's not a big problem. Su Yuan's expression was indifferent. You just need to use your power to envelop the core when you pass through. Lu Yi understood and immediately began to locate the Jade Snail in the Starry Sky Pond. He had used the Starry Sky Pond to travel to and from the Jade Snail Galaxy several times, so he was naturally familiar with the process and quickly found something. Elder, I'll be going then. After saying this to Su Yuan, Lu Yi used his power to envelop the core and plunged into the Starry Sky Pond. The scene of a starry sky that had shrunk countless times rushing towards him was incomparably shocking no matter how many times he saw it. The star field that belonged to the Jade Snail Galaxy was constantly magnified in his field of vision. By the time Lu Yi regained his senses, he had already arrived at the Jade Snail Galaxy. After identifying the direction, Lu Yi drove the core and flew towards the 9 states. Eastern minuscule mountain. Due to the previous incidents, the 3 Rizhao didn't cultivate. Instead, they constantly sensed the movements of the headquarters in anticipation of some changes. Unfortunately, the headquarters of the minuscule mountain had remained somewhere in the starry sky without any signs of movement. Only now did it finally move. What made Su Yuqing and the others extremely surprised was that the trajectory of the minuscule mountain had suddenly changed greatly. The 3 of them immediately gathered together. After a simple discussion, they came to a conclusion: the location of the core had changed greatly. That was why the trajectory of the minuscule mountain had changed as well. First, the core was completely isolated by some mysterious power, causing the 3 divisions of the minuscule mountain to stop drifting. In just a few days, the location of the core had changed greatly. All these strange things were really confusing. No one knew what was going on. Even so, the Rizhao of the Miniman clan were extremely excited and expectant. This was because if the location of the core had changed greatly, it was very likely that the core had already left the wonder of the illusory blood magic eye. This change was undoubtedly a good sign. As for the exact location of the core now, the minuscule mountain had no way of knowing. They had to observe the trajectory of the 3 divisions of the minuscule mountain for decades to 100 years before they could make a comprehensive deduction. This wasn't something that could be solved in a short period of time. Therefore, the 3 Rizhao quickly gathered together again to discuss the important matter of deducing the location of the core. At this time, not only was Lu Yi at the core, but Xiang Yin, Yang Ling, and Hu Dequan were also there. Looking at the domain in front of them, Xiang Yin said excitedly, "My lord, is that your domain?" "The domain I was born in is not my domain," Lu Yi replied. Xiang Yin and the others had been in the core world all this time. Now that they were about to reach the 9 states, it was naturally inappropriate to let them stay there. It wasn't difficult to settle them down. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin were his blood servants. They didn't dare to disobey Lu Ye's orders. They could stay in the 9 states for the time being. As for Yang Ling and Hu Dequan, the 2 of them could also stay in the 9 states and wait for the 3 divisions of the minuscule mountain to merge. When that day came, they would be able to meet their Dao companions again. Moreover, the 4 of them were at the late stage of the Moon Jade realm. They were quite strong and could protect the 9 states if they stayed here. Many dangers in the starry sky came suddenly. For example, the descent of the filth race and the invasion of the insect nest on the way. The 9 states had been safe for so many years because of Little Nine's concealment ability and Jade Konk's remote location. However, there was always a possibility, so they still had to take some precautions. It would take too long to wait for the native cultivators of the 9 states to grow up. If anything happened during this time, the 9 states couldn't bear it. Therefore, Lu Yi had the idea of using the dwarf race as his backer. Now that he had brought back the core of the minuscule mountain, the merged minuscule mountain would become the strongest backer of the 9 states in the future. They wouldn't have to worry about any external invasion. In a few days they had reached the outer space of the 9 states. End of chapter. Chapter 1813. On the core Lu Yi's side. In the past, at this time Little Nine would have taken the initiative to contact him, but this time, there was no message from Little Nine. He didn't think that anything had happened to Little Nine. If something had happened to Little Nine, then 9 provinces would not be peaceful. Little Nine was probably addicted to the company of Little Huanyang now, but this was a good thing. At least Little Nine would not be lonely anymore. Soon he arrived at the side of 9 provinces. As usual, Lu Ye's whereabouts were immediately investigated by the 9 provinces constellations who were patrolling nearby. When they saw that it was Lu Yi, they immediately let down their guard and continued patrolling after greeting him. At first, when Lu Yi returned from the 10,000 Elephant Sea, the constellations of 9 provinces were very excited and expectant. But as he left and returned more and more often, everyone was used to it. For constellations like them, cultivating and becoming stronger was always the most important task. Since 9 provinces did not have their own spirit jade veins, they could only go deep into the starry sky to search for spirit jade. After accumulating a certain amount, they would refine it and turn it into nutrients for their own growth. It was not surprising that the core stopped and looked at it from afar. If there were cultivators who did not know the truth and encountered the core in the starry sky, they would not even look at it because there were too many such things in the starry sky. But it was the core of Minuscule Mountain. In order to find this core, the 3 divisions of Minuscule Mountain had worked hard for countless years. Finally, the dust settled today. Looking down at the core under his feet, Lu Ye's mind moved slightly and he gently stomped his feet. The core trembled slightly and a strange power spread out, as if some seal had been broken. The seal had indeed been broken. Before Lu Yi took the core out of the wonder of illusory blood demon pupil, he used his identity as the master of the source to place a layer of seal on the core. This layer of seal only had one function, which was to create a similar isolation force to the wonder, preventing the 3 divisions of minuscule mountain from fusing with the core. The reason why he did this was because he considered the changes in his journey. If he did not place the seal, the moment Lu Yi took the core out of the wonder, the 3 divisions of minuscule mountain would fuse toward the core. This was undoubtedly not conducive to the stability of minuscule mountain. Only now, when he returned to 9 provinces, did Lu Yi remove this layer of seal. Although he could not see the current state of the 3 divisions of minuscule mountain, Lu Yi still expected that it would be a long wait. The 3 divisions of Mount Fangsuan were very far away from the core. It wouldn't take a day or 2 for them to fuse together. Almost at the same time that Lu Yi removed the seal on minuscule mountain, the many sunshine projections in the illusory hall changed. More than half of them instantly vanished without a trace, and although the rest could still be maintained, they were all distorted to varying degrees. This abnormal situation was undoubtedly caused by the Fangsuan mountains of the various divisions trembling violently. Their true bodies were in the various divisions, and their spiritual projections were here. The Fangsuan mountains of the headquarters were trembling violently, and this caused their projections to be affected. After a while, the many figures that had disappeared gathered once again. A Rizhao from the south shouted, "Everyone, just now, our headquarters, Mount Fangsuan, suddenly changed its direction again. It's heading straight towards a certain direction at an unprecedented speed." In the east, Qin Xianhai added, "It's the same for the east." The 2 Rizhao tribes looked towards the west. Zhang Kuan from the west said, "It's the same for the west." When he finished speaking, the group of Rizhao tribes all felt excitement and anticipation from their spiritual fluctuations. They realized that the critical moment that would change the fate of Mount Fangsuan seemed to have arrived. A few days ago, there was a sudden huge change in the movement trajectory of the 3 divisions of Mount Fangsuan. From this, they deduced that there should be a huge change in the location of the core, which caused the movement trajectory of the 3 divisions of Mount Fangsuan to change. They had gathered here to discuss how to deduce the exact location of the core. Who would have thought that before they could come to a conclusion, another change would occur? And this time it was obviously different from the previous time. Not only did the movement trajectory change, but the movement speed of Mount Fangsuan also changed. It was as if the 3 divisions of Mount Fangsuan were being pulled by some kind of force. This was something that had never happened before, and they couldn't help but let their imaginations run wild. Let's deduce it. Let's see if there will be an intersection if the 3 divisions are moving in the same direction. There is one. A Rizhao tribe said seriously. He didn't finish his sentence, but everyone knew what it meant for the humanoid tribe if there was an intersection between the 3 divisions of Mount Fangsuan. This concerned the future of the humanoid tribe, and many Rizhao tribes had no objections. They immediately started to deduce. The various divisions of Mount Fangsuan had been drifting in the universe for so long, and their understanding of the universe could be said to be incomparable to that of any other race. They basically had the star charts of all the major galaxies. According to the current location and the movement direction of Mount Fangsuan, they could easily deduce which galaxy the headquarters would pass through in the next few decades. There might be some errors, but they wouldn't be too big. Rizhao tribes' projections constantly disappeared and reappeared. The group of Rizhao tribes busied themselves for half a day, and the 3 divisions of Mount Fangsuan's movement trajectory were gradually deduced. The 3 routes were placed together and everyone focused on them. Their gazes quickly converged on an intersection point. Jade Conch Galaxy. Su Yuqing's eyes lit up as she murmured. From the information they had, if the 3 divisions of Mount Fangsuan didn't change their direction, they would pass through this Jade Conch Galaxy sooner or later. And Jade Conch, she was all too familiar with this name. The core is here? Rizhao tribe asked. This Jade Conch. Who knows about it? Rizhao tribe asked. There were countless galaxies in the universe, and even Rizhao tribe didn't dare to say that they knew every galaxy like the back of their hand. Most of them knew about the more famous galaxies, and this Jade Conch sounded like a relatively weak one. Naturally, they wouldn't pay attention to it. Even Wu Qima and Qin Xianhai were deep in thought. Mount Fangsuan in the east had passed through Jade Conch before, but they didn't know about it, so naturally they hadn't heard of it. Only Su Yuqing spoke slowly. Jade Conch is the galaxy where Lu Yi was born. The group of Rizhao tribes immediately looked over, and one of them said in surprise, "Lu Yi is Junior Sister's little Dao partner?" As soon as he finished speaking, another Rizhao tribe slapped his soul projection away. Although it was no secret that Su Yuqing had found a young Dao partner in the east, and Su Yuqing herself didn't deny it, no one mentioned it in front of her. They were all Rizhao tribes and they all cared about their reputation. If it were a man, it would be fine if he was an old cow eating young grass. The key point was that Su Yuqing was a woman. Yes. Su Yuqing's expression was normal. The domain he was born in is called Jiutian. Jiutian realm is in Jade Conch Galaxy and what? Back then, when he came to the eastern regions from the 10,000 Elephant Sea, I mentioned the matter of the core to him. He once asked me if he could place the core near the 9 heavens after finding it. That way the Fangsuan mountain would be able to fuse there. This kid. Cough cough, junior brother Lu wants Mount Fangsuan to protect Jiutian? Rizhao tribe sensed Lu Ye's intention. That should be his intention. As far as I know, Jiutian has just become a large domain. Its foundation is still very weak, Su Yuqing replied. The Rizhao tribes were silent. After a while, Jianghu slapped his thigh. Good kid, he really did it. The matter was clear now. Lu Yi found the core and brought it back to Jade Conch. That was why the 3 tribes of Mount Fangsuan were headed in Jade Conch's direction under the guidance of the core. To Zhang Kuan, who had personally sent Lu Yi over, this was simply inconceivable. Since ancient times, the lesser human tribe had sent far too many Yu Yao from other tribes to search for cores. Many of them had been nurtured by the lesser human tribe with a tremendous amount of effort. But so far no one had succeeded. They either never returned, no one knew if they were dead or alive, or returned empty-handed without seeing the core at all. So many years, so many people's efforts had yielded no results, and Lu Yi had only been gone for a few years? It had only been 3 years and he had found the core. No matter what, this was a joyous occasion for the hominin tribe. The 3 tribes had been waiting for this moment for many years. They had looked forward to it again and again, but were disappointed again and again. No one had expected this pleasant surprise to come so suddenly. It left them Rizhao tribe at a loss for what to do. Junior sister's eye for a son-in-law is truly outstanding. Rizhao tribe couldn't help but praise. Regardless of whether Lu Yi was an old cow eating young grass or his potential in cultivation, just helping the hominin tribe find the core was a heaven-shaking contribution. Even if Lu Yi was a good-for-nothing, the hominin tribe would still take good care of him in the future. A Rizhao tribe member in the west chuckled and said, "You may not know this, but our junior brother Lu is quite famous in the 10,000 Creations Sea. He has led a group of cultivators to occupy the 3-world island, which is a high-class spiritual island. He has also led his men to occupy another high-class spiritual island. In that battle the enemy Yu Yao were all killed. Even Rizhao tribe's guard tribe tried to stop him, but he was ruthlessly slapped in the face by Lu Yi." When the Rizhao tribe members heard this, they couldn't help but look surprised. They more or less knew what it meant to occupy a high-class spiritual island in a place like the 10,000 Creations Sea. Generally speaking, high-class spiritual islands were the exclusive property of the top forces. Without some means and ability, it was impossible to occupy them. Even if one occupied them, it wouldn't last long. Not to mention occupying another high-class spiritual island by force. This was countless times more difficult than simply occupying a high-class spiritual island. Lu Ye's side had not only occupied a high-class spiritual island, but had also attacked another one? The Rizhao tribe members suddenly realized that they seemed to have underestimated this cheap junior brother's ability. Otherwise, how could he have done something that no one had done for so many years in just 3 years? This was undoubtedly the embodiment of his own strength. Congratulations, junior sister, for finding such a good son-in-law. You have made a great contribution to our tribe. When the 3 tribes merge in the future, junior sister will have to recommend junior brother Lu to us. A wave of praises sounded. Su Yuqing smiled reservedly, her face full of pride. Her heart, which had been in suspense for 3 years, was now completely at ease. End of chapter. Chapter 1814. Based on the current information, the lesser human race's long-lost core had been brought out of the wonder by Lu Yi and placed in the Jade Conch Galaxy. That was why the 3 minuscule mountains' trajectories had changed so drastically, moving toward a single intersection point. However, this was only the deduction of the dwarf clan's Rizhao. No one could be sure until they saw it with their own eyes. While they were excited, a Rizhao in the south said, "Which one of us is closer to the Jade Conch? This is an important matter. We should go and verify it." All the Rizhao nodded in agreement. Su Yuqing said, "I'll go to the east. More than 10 years ago, I passed by the Jade Conch galaxy in the east. We're the closest. If I hurry, I can return to the Jade Conch in 3 to 5 months." Qin Shenhai added, "I'll go with junior sister." Even Rizhao would consume a lot of energy if he traveled at full speed. He couldn't maintain it for 3 to 5 months. If the two of them traveled together, they could take turns. Qin Shenhai also wanted to go to the Jade Conch to see for himself whether the core had been brought back by Lu Yi. This was the top priority of the dwarf clan for countless years. "Then I'll have to trouble the two of you." The rest of the Rizhao had no objections. After the discussion was settled, the projections quickly dispersed. A moment later, two figures from the eastern Fangsuan mountain rushed into the sky. After flying out of the boundary, they turned into streams of light and rushed towards the Jade Conch. Rizhao's speed was so fast that even the Fangsuan mountain couldn't compare with him. If not, Su Yuqing wouldn't have said that she would return to the Jade Conch in 3 to 5 months. It should be known that the eastern Fangsuan mountain passed by the Jade Conch more than 10 years ago. In other words, if she rushed at full speed, she could complete the journey of the Fangsuan mountain in 3 to 5 months. On the ethereal peak, Wuxia sighed with his hands behind his back. He also wanted to go to the Jade Conch galaxy to see the situation, but Qin Shenhai and Su Yuqing had left. He had to stay behind to look after the Jade Conch galaxy. In the 9 prefectures, Lu Yi returned after settling down the core of the Fangsuan mountain. He didn't go to the Jade Blood sect. Instead, he went directly to the Guardian Hall in the Heaven continent. He found the current guardian of the 9 prefectures and had a face-to-face meeting with him. Soon, a message was spread through the Guardian Hall. Lu Yi placed something that looked like a fake mountain near the 9 prefectures. No cultivators were allowed to approach it. Also, for cultivators from Yuyao had come to this realm. If anyone encountered them by chance, there was no need to panic. The core had been restricted by Lu Yi, so it didn't matter even if the cultivators of the 9 regions approached it. They couldn't break Lu Ye's restriction and enter the core world, but it was always right to be careful. As for the 4 Yuyao, they were naturally the Xiang sisters Yang Ling and Hu Dequan. Although Yuyao hadn't been born in the land of the 9 prefectures, they weren't unfamiliar with Yuyao. This was because Yuyao had been born in the flower world. After the flower world had attached itself to the land of the 9 prefectures and obtained great benefits, Hua Qinying had been promoted to Yuyao. There was also Patriarch Mu He of the Wood Spirits and Patriarch Black Umbrella of the Spore race. Both of them were Yuyao cultivators. They had traveled the 9 provinces before and had interacted with many cultivators of the 9 provinces. Lu Yi finally met Little 9. Little Huan Yang blindly followed behind Little Jiao, like Little Jiao's tail. Her 2 big watery eyes revealed ignorance and naivety. After chatting with Little 9 for a while and confirming that nothing had happened in the 9 provinces recently, Lu Yi sent it off to play with Little Huan Yang. Lu Yi hurriedly rushed out of the 9 provinces and returned to the core world. Xiang Yin and the others were still there. 4 pairs of eyes were staring at the blood-refining realm near the 9 prefectures in shock. From their point of view, the blood-refining realm's appearance was too shocking. It looked like a giant creature that had its head and limbs chopped off. Seeing Lu Yi return, Xiang Yin turned to look at him. "Lord, what's the situation in that realm? My sister and I felt that something was calling out to us." They had also told Yang Ling and Hu Dequan about this, but unfortunately Yang Ling and Hu Dequan didn't feel the same way. This made Xiang Yin guess. Lu Yi glanced at the blood-refining realm and explained, "It's a place called the blood-refining realm formed by the remains of the blood ancestor. Don't go near it." Ma Shangxi had a similar feeling when he saw the blood-refining realm. He vaguely felt that the opportunity for him to break through to the sunshine realm lay in the blood-refining realm. He wanted to ask Lu Yi to let him go there, but Lu Yi heartlessly refused, which made Ma Shangxi very sad. Xiang Yin and Ma Shangxi were both blood race, and they were all blood race with divine nature. It wasn't strange for them to have similar feelings in front of the remains of the blood ancestor. Lu Yi had refused Ma Shangxi mainly because of the difference in strength between them. They were both Yuyao, so Lu Yi was confident that he could control Ma Shangxi, a blood warrior, with his precious blood. However, no one knew what would happen if a blood warrior's cultivation broke through to the sunshine realm. Xiang Yin and Xiang Yin's strength wasn't much worse than Ma Shangxi's, so Lu Yi naturally wouldn't let them go to the blood-refining realm. Even if he wanted to go, now was not the time. "I'm going out for a few months. During my absence you two guard the core world. No one is allowed to approach it. Lu Yi ordered. Yes. Xiang Yin accepted the order. Xian Yu nodded. Lu Yi then looked at Yang Ling and Hu Dequan. You two can do as you please. The core world has already been settled, but it will take some time for the 3 divisions of minuscule mountain to merge. Yang Ling chuckled. We can afford to wait. They had been trapped in the core world for so many years. Now that the dust had settled, minuscule mountain must be on its way to merge. What couldn't they afford to wait? The 9 prefectures was a good place. The two of them could find a place to cultivate and relax after completing their mission. After making arrangements for the 9 prefectures, Lu Yi left. He had to return to the 10,000 Elephant Sea to replenish the fuel for his talent tree. Although he had obtained a batch of fire-type resources from the life origin realm, what he was going to do next would consume a lot of fuel for his talent tree. The 10,000 Elephant Sea was the place to replenish the fuel. About 10 days later, Lu Yi returned to the passage leading to the Soul Race's ancestral land. He went through the starry sky pool and arrived at the Blue Moon Galaxy. Another 10 days later, he arrived at the insect passage connecting the Blue Moon Galaxy and the 10,000 Elephant Galaxy. Yu Yao was an old acquaintance of Lu Yi. After all, Lu Yi had used this insect passage several times. Moreover, as the 3rd island master of the 3-world island, he had led an army to defeat the Baiwei Island. Lu Yi was not a nobody on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Yu Yao was undoubtedly very surprised to see Lu Yi suddenly appear. This was because she had no record of Lu Yi coming from the 10,000 Elephant Sea. She did not know how he had entered the 10,000 Elephant Sea from their galaxy. However, this was not a big deal. There were many routes in the universe. Sometimes one would leave from one place and return from another. After exchanging a few words with Lu Yi, he happily let them pass. After more than 3 years, Lu Yi passed through the insect passage and returned to the 10,000 Elephant Galaxy. Several days later, in the bustling 3-world island, Lu Yi was activating his talent tree to refine all kinds of fire-type resources and replenishing his fuel reserves. Wan Xiao stood in front of him, holding a jade scroll and talking endlessly. Lu Yi could not help but sigh. Senior sister, you and old Tang can take care of everything on the island. You don't have to tell me so much. Wan Xiao scolded. The 3-world island is the 3-world island. This is a spiritual island shared by all of the 3 worlds. The accounting is the most serious problem. Our 3-world island has developed very well in your absence. You should know how much spirit jades we've earned and how much we've spent. The 3-world island had developed better and better in Lu Ye's absence. When he had left, the 3-world island had been thriving. Later, a group of hominins had settled down and opened a talisman shop on the 3-world island. This was the only talisman shop of the hominins on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Just this name alone was enough to attract people. If they could get their hands on 1 or 2 purple talismans, they could definitely use them as a trump card. Now, the busiest place on the 3-world island was not the 3-world pill shop or the Rainbow Chamber of Commerce's branch. It was the area where the talisman shop of the hominins was located. Every day, a large number of cultivators would line up to buy talismans from the hominins, but the supply still could not meet the demand. The hominin cultivators on the 3-world island were both happy and frustrated. They were happy because it was too easy to earn spirit jades here, but they were frustrated because their lives were miserable. If they were not refining talismans every day, they were on the road to refining talismans. The storage of spirit jades on the 3-world island had reached more than 1 billion. Now, in the entire 10,000 Elephant Sea, the 3-world island's cultivators were treated the best. With abundant cultivation resources, other than completing their own missions, the 3-world island's cultivators were working hard on their cultivation. The strength of the constellations on the 9 states side had generally improved. Many constellations from the Green Li Dao world and the Jade Conch world even showed signs of advancing to Yu Yao. This was especially so for the cultivators from the Jade Conch world. 3 constellations had already advanced to Yu Yao, which was really worth celebrating. No matter how many Yu Yao there were, only the registered 5 could participate in the Battle of the Spiritual Islands. However, the increase in the number of Yu Yao on the island was also a reflection of the island's foundation. The level of Yu Yao had always been the awkward part of the 9 states. Now, other than Lu Yi, there was no other Yu Yao in the 9 states. That was why Wan Xiao had come to Lu Ye's side to nag. The 3-world island was able to establish itself because of Lu Yi. The 3-world island's cultivators could now have such a good cultivation environment because of Lu Ye's efforts. Naturally, Lu Yi had to know about the accounts. Lu Yi blinked and looked at Wan Xiao, but her hands did not stop refining the resources. I know now. Wan Xiao sighed. I knew you would have this attitude. If you have time in the future, you should pay more attention. Lu Yi nodded repeatedly. I understand. Wan Xiao left helplessly. Suddenly, she stopped and turned to look at Lu Yi. When you return to the Jade Conch world, bring back a batch of resources. Okay. Lu Yi agreed. Happy Mid-Autumn Festival, everyone. My head hurts from coughing. It'll take me 10 days to half a month to recover. It's really difficult. End of chapter. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.